I call to order this April 10th, 2023 Henderson County Board of Public Education Board meeting. Would all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman asked me to share this evening. We wanted to take a moment to recognize two students who we recently lost, and we wanted to make sure that we took some time to honor those two young men today, and also remind folks out there to check on your kids, check on your loved ones, and to let them know that we have several services and resources available regardless of what it is those students and you and your family may be going through. We'll have a presentation tonight. This is our program feature that'll talk a lot about our student services group, and I'm really happy to have our nurses and social workers and counselors here to help support Mr. Grubmeyer in that presentation. And we're going to talk a little bit about school safety too, but what I would ask is if you could join me in honoring Landon Lockamy, Apple Valley Middle School 8th grader, and Aiden Bright, West Henderson High School 12th grader. With a moment of silence, I would ask you to join me, please. Thank you for taking that time. What I would also like to mention is, as we do the people's business here this evening, let us remember that our students are the main reason that we are here. And both those two who we honor their memory and the almost 13,000 that we serve otherwise. And let's make sure that we hold those 13,000 up as we continue through this year that is speeding by. So thank you, sir, for that opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Moving on, we will do the agenda approval. I'll take a motion when someone's ready to make that motion. Anybody?
I move that we approve the agenda as written.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Good. Recognitions. First is going to be the Global Education Excellence Award. Rachel Rodriguez, International Exchange Coordinator. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me here this afternoon to share our appreciation for Henderson County Public Schools, and specifically Mr. Carl Taylor, and for the difference you all are making in global education and cultural understanding. My name is Rachel Rodriguez, and I'm Western North Carolina's Regional Coordinator with EF High School Exchange Year, a nonprofit that brings high school students from 13 different countries to come here for a semester or full academic year and live with an American host family and get the American high school experience. I'm also joined by Emily Fitzpatrick, who is another one of our local coordinators. I'm proud and appreciative to live in a school district that values cultural exchange. In 1961, Congress passed the Fulbright-Hays Act to ensure educational and cultural exchange became part of the American experience and our diplomacy efforts as a nation. Each year, EF High School Exchange Year takes the time to honor schools that have gone above and beyond in global education. This year, I was proud to nominate Henderson County Schools. Henderson County was one of the first school districts in our region to bring cultural exchange opportunities back to our students post-COVID. A true testament to how much this district values students' understanding of other cultures and 21st century skills. I want to thank Mr. Carl Taylor, who has provided seamless communication between EF, school principals, and other stakeholders to make sure that Henderson County students have access to this fun and important facet of global education and global diplomacy. Henderson County has welcomed our exchange students into academics, sports, and school culture. Last year, Lovisa from Sweden was welcomed with open arms as the only girl on North Henderson's football team. Esme from the Netherlands got to participate in West Henderson's graduation ceremony after a straight A school year, thanks to the support of her teachers. Caroline from Germany has found a community in track and field at North Henderson. I've also spoken to countless Henderson County students who love the opportunity to interact with a new culture and a new friend at their school. Next year, 3 of the 4 traditional high schools will be hosting an EF exchange student, and we hope to increase that to 4 out of 4 before the school year begins. So thank you all for participating in cultural exchange. And as a small token of our appreciation, I'm honored to present Henderson County Public Schools with the 2023 EF Global Education Excellence Award.
Yeah, I try to get him up here.
I will come for one, but this, I see that as the board's.
I just can't. I think it's the internet. No, I've got it. But all right, next up, we're going to have our program highlight. And as Mr. Garrett alluded to, we kind of changed how we were doing things this month, pushing things back and added some things in light of losing 2 students in school. So first up is going to be student mental health and school safety, but school safety is going to be first with Mr. Massington. So welcome, sir.
Look at that. It's a miracle. Well, so nationally, there's a definition of school safety, which is in front of you, defined as schools and school-related activities where students are safe from violence, bullying, harassment, and the influence of substance abuse. The second is nearly the same, and we know that a safe school environment is linked to improved student and school outcomes. But I want to bring this topic a little bit closer to home and ask, what is school safety? Because it's my opinion that this definition is really a moving target, and it evolves as time goes by. I remember in years gone by when one of our biggest topics was mulch, ground rubber, or AstroTurf for a playground. I would love those days back. We still do shed some concern on those topics still, but we certainly have moved from that environment of school safety. So I believe that it's the totality of what we do. It's all the little pieces that are involved in school safety on a daily basis. And I'm going to give you some idea about what we do in general, and then I'm going to highlight some of these things. But school safety involves bus drop-off, whether it's coming to school or leaving a student behind in the afternoon, car rider lines, crime prevention by environmental design. We use all sorts of internet tools, Gaggle, Securely, Say Something Anonymous Reporting, RAVE. We have radio systems for communication. We have visitor management in our schools. We have AED protocols. We have EpiPen protocols. We have door access and video management. We have room numbering systems. We have a variety of different key systems, whether they're hard keys or electronic keys. We have SRO liaisons. We have traffic matters we talk to DOT about, threat assessments, safety plans, fire drills, emergency response plans, emergency management, evacuation, reunification, to name a few. But this includes our relationships with our community partners, effective use of technology, continuously evaluating new safety protocols, and educating and training our staff and students. So some of our great partners include law enforcement. We're very fortunate here with the Hendersonville Police Department and the Henderson County Sheriff's Department. I saw Major Starling in the back lending his support today, and we appreciate that. But it's really become normal for us to have an SRO in every school. But I feel compelled to drive home how unique this situation is and how wonderful it is for us to have that level of commitment. Because if you look at it, we have 24 people from the Sheriff's Department alone. And you could look at that through the lens of force reduction. I'm sure the sheriff could find plenty of work for those men and women, but he's dedicated that amount of resources to us, and we should remain grateful to have that type of commitment. Similarly, from the health department, we have a similar commitment. We have a nurse in every school, also very unique and not a common thread throughout the state of North Carolina. And these two entities are really integrated with our teaching staff and our administrations. And it's very interesting to me because when at times people have to be shuffled around, I often get principals saying, wait a minute, not my SRO, don't take my nurse. They really have become part of our team, and we're very grateful to have them. I similarly have a great relationship with our emergency services department in Henderson County, and we collaborate greatly. And we recently completed a program that was 2 years in the works, but we now have a document for each and every individual building. That's our emergency response plan. So that should the need arise that our emergency services people have to respond to a school, they know where to go, they know who to talk to, they know what radio frequency to be on, they have a layout of the building, and we've detailed all those things so that nothing has to be decided on the fly. We use a lot of technology these days. If I can get this to work. I'm just not good with this stuff, am I? There we go. So I say internet, but I really mean we monitor the internet and we monitor the activity of all of our students using our devices. It's an integral tool for us because, as Matt will elaborate on, it gives us insight to children and what their thoughts are, whether they're good or bad, so that we have the opportunity to serve them appropriately. We have door access, key cards that we manage now. It's a great tool for us because we can turn doors on, turn doors off, open doors, close doors, know when they're left open. And we continue to expand that program. We have video protocol. We have cameras now in almost every school. That process is finishing up the elementary schools now. This helps us in investigations. It helps us evaluate activities that need to be identified in schools for more attention. We've established a retention schedule for that type of documentation and given different people rights levels to use it. We have visitor management. So now we know who's in the building, the reason that they're there, how long they're intending to be there. One of the greatest things for us is it's an attendance monitor. So if a teacher, for example, gets permission to leave in the middle of the day for an hour and something were to occur, we know we don't have to be looking for that person because we have real-time attendance of people in and out of the buildings. Protocols and training. So one of the things that we're doing is years ago, and the reason our definition changes is because times change. So at one point, doors were keyed uniquely. We've learned through the years now that people should be able to get into any door at any time if needed. So we've been in the process of rekeying all of our doors so that if you're in a particular school, your key will get you in any classroom. It's a big undertaking. We have over 1,000 doors when we talk about a project like that. We're involved in a window numbering plan. There was a time we labeled all the exterior glass with what room number it was so responding people could know where they were going. It was a little bit chaotic. Some things have faded, some things have come down, and we're redoing that now. And something that I'm really motivated and excited about is we're changing our emergency response protocol for this coming fall. The words and the movements that we've been doing for almost 20 years kind of wane themselves away. And the current protocol that is taking over the country is a program called I Love You Guys Emergency Response Plan. So we will be initiating the training and education of our staff, students, and parents with those protocols coming August of 2024. I'm sorry, 23, the 23-24 school year.
Got a couple questions for you, if you don't mind. You know, I think on every parent's mind, everybody in the community is, you know, God forbid it's something like in Nashville happened here, or Uvalde, or the like, right? And so as I sit in here on this board, I wonder, are we doing enough? Can we do more? Do you need more from us? What can we do to, you know, nothing's foolproof, but what can we do to try to keep our kids as safe and as secure as possible? And what, is there anything that this board can provide you, i.e., and I'm putting you on the spot, metal detectors or clear backpacks or any of that stuff? Is that,
So I think all those questions are really cultural, and decisions need to be made by the board and school administration about what roads you want to go down. You know, metal detectors have come a long way. One example is there's a product now called Open Gate. It's two pylons that stand freely on the floor adjacent to each other. Doesn't really interfere with the speed at which people travel through. You could darn them in a school flag. Not the traditional hoop that you have to walk through. It's not as intimidating, if you may. Those are all things to consider. You know, it would be a big project, but in high schools, as an example, you'd probably have to have 6 or 7 entry points to be successful with the use of that type of technology. There's always things you can do. I used to work for a gentleman who said to me, it's not about the money, but it's about the money. So these are decisions that can be researched. We can provide you all the data that you want to make a good decision.
yeah.
But there's all sorts of technology that people are using, whether it's metal detectors or vape detectors or
Sure.
all sorts of things in the world today.
Yeah, and so some of our schools are better off than others. You know, Hendersonville High School was just built, and so it's a kind of a cohesive campus. But if you go to East, for example, and we've got plans to put fencing around there as a deterrent. But what are there, 8 buildings, 9 separate buildings, something like that? Just want to know if you guys can come to us, bring us ideas of what we could do to do better. Let us worry about the money with our commissioners if that's something that's important for this community. I feel like this community will get it done. So if you could bring us some recommendations, then that'd be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Mr. Massington.
Mike.
No, it's not Mike, it's Mr. Massington.
Microphone.
Oh, microphone, okay. Mr. Massington, you came from Florida, correct?
You gonna hold that against me?
No. No. I already called you Mike, or I didn't call you Mike, but.
I did.
And you had some experience in this line of work, correct?
I did.
So what'd you do in Florida?
I was in law enforcement for 27 years.
27 years. When I was elected to the school board in 2018, we didn't have a director of school safety. And we decided to make this a standalone position. And we had school safety, but it was not a standalone position. And we went out and we were looking for a person, and with what you have and you brought it. And I want to tell everybody that's listening that, you know, 27 years of law enforcement. We appreciate you and your team and looking out. And I know we can never be safe enough, but you're doing a heck of a job, and we really appreciate it. And I'm glad that we created this position. I'm glad you filled it. Thank you.
All right, next up, we're going to have Mr. Grumeyer, kind of on the student mental health side of things. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to echo what Mr. Egoff said about Mr. Massington.
course, his office is right next to mine, and Jennifer Shelton's office is across the hall, and the three of us, I don't think, hardly ever work on anything that the other two aren't also working on. And so just kind of on a personal note, Scott, I appreciate working with you, and I'm glad that his presentation was first, because much of what Scott does on the school safety side of things does come eventually to student services in terms of mental health. And I think we're going to see some of those connections, as Scott has kind of already previewed. A lot of words on this slide. Kind of want to put into context those 13,000 students that our superintendent mentioned just a few minutes ago. In what context are those families raising those 13,000 children? In what context are schools trying to educate those kids when it comes to mental health? And so this slide has some real current information on it from the National Institutes of Health, talking about 1 in 5 children in classrooms aged 3 to 17, right, are currently experiencing a mental illness or crisis. That's a lot of kids. And so a lot of us kind of maybe think back to the old days about, well, mental health was a specialist job, but that's no longer the case. Mental illness is everyone's job, as I hope my presentation this morning or this afternoon will talk about. You'll also see that there are some mentions about specific areas of mental illness that are of special concern, especially around suicide and the current level of admits to the emergency departments. Those bullets at the bottom of the slide go into a little bit of detail about that. The only group for whom emergency room visits increased are for children. And these are all pre-COVID numbers. And so as this slide documents, COVID has only exacerbated the number of children and adults, for that matter, right, admitted to the emergency room for mental illness and mental illness symptoms. Also, as of course we know in our country right now, suicide and the mental health crisis is a real concern for many of our families. And you can see that the rates of death from suicide for especially those 12 and older, and then specifically for those young people that are in our schools, 12 to 17, seeing a very dramatic increase in the rates of death from suicide. And so I'm glad to be here tonight. I think it is happening at the right time. Certainly my staff and I have put a lot of thought into tonight's presentation, because it's these kinds of numbers that are adding weight to the work of these folks back here, and to, of course, all of the work that we're doing with the children and the families that we share. A lot of times when I'm in a meeting here in the community, I'll either be asked, or more likely I'll hear the clinical experts being asked, why is this happening? Why are we undergoing such an incredible increase in the prevalence and acuity of mental illness with young people? And I'm not a clinical person, but these are the things that most folks who are clinical settle on. The risk factors for a young person developing a mental illness are in this list. The very most significant risk factor is trauma. And then, of course, all of these other things contribute. Violence and abuse, issues with self-esteem, having a chronic medical condition, being involved in juvenile justice, in the foster care program, being homelessness, alcohol, nicotine, and other drug use by both children and families are risk factors for young people developing mental illness, having a family history that includes conflict within the family or a family history of mental illness, and then, of course, stressful life events. And in the best of times, having a young person in your home can be stressful. And in the worst of times, which is what I think we're experiencing right now, there's an awful lot of stress that we're all trying to shoulder together. And those stressful events tend to contribute to the number of young people that are going to develop a mental illness or the signs and symptoms of one. And then, of course, for those who are already struggling with a mental illness, it's going to make those symptoms more acute and the problem more disruptive to their school and lives. We talk a lot in our department and in schools generally about the teeter-totter. And if there's one thing that I'm hoping that the group tonight will take away from my presentation, is that while the national statistics are terrible when it comes to mental illness, we have some power as a school system, because we can jump on the other side of the seesaw. If it's a risk factor that makes a young person more likely to develop a mental illness, it's a protective factor that makes it less likely. And as you can see from that list, those of us in this room right now, and those of us that are watching at home, those that are working in the schools or raising children, look at the power that we have together to maybe ameliorate or reduce the number of children that maybe are going to undergo a mental illness. Those things are having the support from a family. Having one significant relationship with an adult is the single most powerful protective factor that our experts talk about. A lot of times we talk to our teachers and coaches, our music folks, right? Our club sponsors, the parents that are in the car rider line. We're talking about you can be that adult. In many cases, the folks in my department are striving to be that relationship that can protect a child. A lot of times when we do have those positive relationships, what follows are those other protective factors. The kids get better at self-care. Their self-esteem improves. Sometimes we're able to teach them problem-solving skills in a classroom. Sometimes when children feel like successful students, it leads to a sense of control in their lives. When even a child is not successful in school, it's important for us to step in and say, but how are you dealing with that lack of success? I know as a teacher, a lot of times I was like, but the content, but the content, but the content. But a lot of our children, of course, are struggling with all kinds of things that keep them from getting the content too. And for us to jump in and help them with their coping strategies, to help them understand maybe what the root causes of some of those difficulties, academic and otherwise, can be a real sense of power for both us as educators, as human beings, and that's going to translate into a child that is better protected from mental illness. Of course, none of these things in this list are probably surprising to you, including if we can avoid negative coping strategies like using alcohol and drugs. Just today I was at a meeting where we're talking about the current substance misuse crisis as being kind of an example of self-medicating, right? If we can avoid that, that protects us. Consistent home routines, regular school attendance, and academic performance, which you guys will see later on in the presentation and some of the data that student services folks are keeping, is an important protection. And then, of course, we're all the time talking about where do you belong. And when kids belong in school, when kids belong to their congregation, when they belong to a family, when they belong to a community, then they're better protected at developing maybe a mental illness. Now, it's important also to know that both on this slide and on the one before, one size fits one. So we can stack all of those risk factors onto a kid, and we can find that children can succeed nevertheless. And then we can also do everything that we can when it comes to protecting children. And even if that child only has a few risk factors, sometimes the equation has a negative outcome. So we know what the answers are, but doing all of these things doesn't guarantee us any outcomes. It just is the right work, in my opinion. Let's talk about the work for a minute. This is what the structure of student services looks like at the current time. We really have 4 pieces in our student services department. We have specialists, and those specialists are in subjects. Subjects for student services include foster, homeless, attendance. And we've got a total of 5 folks in my department that are specialists in those ways, and all 5 of those people serve all 23 schools, right? So these folks are spread far and wide across our school system, but their work is invaluable. If we kind of go clockwise around the diagram, the next group of folks I want to mention are the school counselors. We have 13 school counselors in our elementary schools, and we have 13 total in our high schools, and we have 9 middle school counselors. So that brings our total school counselor number to 35. We're lucky to now have 24 school nurses. Of course, as you on the board know, that's a relatively recent development. We're thrilled to have that support. There's 24 of those. There are 1 supervisor who's with us tonight, 3 school leads, and one of whom is with us tonight, and then 20 school nurses. School-based social workers, I'm grateful to this board who agreed to restart student services, what I think seems like a long time ago, but it was only 6 years ago. And at that time, we hired 8 social workers. It's one of the joys of my career to have kind of hired all 8 of those first social workers in our department, but that number has grown to 13. And all 5 of those specialists in the top left corner are social workers. So we've really grown from having 8 social workers in our school system to 18. And I appreciate the board and the commissioner's support in that. In terms of our school-based social workers, we have 3 who only serve in elementary schools. We have 1 social worker who only serves in a high school, but everybody else has a mix of grade levels or grade spans, as we're going to talk about in this slide. So in our elementary schools, we have a team of folks addressing the mental health crisis: counselors, school nurses, and social workers. Those numbers up there on the screen are in full-time equivalents, right? So 4/10 of a person, right, really equals 2/5 of a school week. So those folks are in their schools 4 out of 10 days or twice a week, right? School social workers in our middle schools typically are there for 3 days a week, as is the case in our high schools. As we mentioned before, we have 5 days of school nurse coverage in all of our schools. So grateful for that, because I remember being an administrator, and having to call the school nurse who might have been at 22 other schools that day, because at that point we just had 1 school nurse. So grateful to have someone on site, no matter what's going on in that school when it comes to school nurses. And then our school counselors, of course, 1 in each of the 13 elementary schools, and then 2 or 3 in our high schools. And then we have just 1 middle school that has more than 2, but most of our middle schools have 2 counselors. A lot of words on this slide, so what I thought I would do is to leave the text for you guys to look at later, other than that 3rd column. So in terms of tonight's topic, supporting children facing a mental health crisis or illness, our school counselors tend to have a broader focus than the other 2 pieces of student services. They tend to work a lot in the classroom, but they also, of course, work in small groups. They work with individuals, and what they're really working on, and this is widely misunderstood in our community. I talk to a lot of parents about, well, let's just set our kid up with a school counselor, in the sense that that's the same as a Crossnor counselor or the same as an Access Family Health Services counselor. And it's not really the same in most cases. What our school counselors are doing are working on kids for their growth, academic especially. They're working on resilience and wellness, but especially as it relates to short-term issues that are directly related to school. Now, having said that, there isn't a school counselor in our school system who's going to turn their back on a kid because they've come too many times to the school counseling office. We're meant to be working with kids on a short-term basis, but that is not to say that we don't have lots of kids that we work with all of the time on a longer-term basis, because as we're going to talk about in a minute, the other resources out in the community just aren't available. So that school counselor is stepping in, even though that might be, it might be helpful for the student to have that other support outside of school. A lot of times that support isn't available, and you'll find our school counselors kind of stepping into the breach on that. What all 3 of our folks in student services have in common, school counselors, school social workers, and school nurses, is what's listed last there under mental health support. They all make referrals to outside specialists. All 3 of our groups do that. Our school nurses, of course, no surprise here, but they especially are assessing for emotional and mental health. That's what they do. That's their training. That's their expertise. But they're also, of course, helping kids with their positive behaviors and helping them develop skills to deal with whatever it is that's going on with that child and his or her health. They, of course, also make referrals for specialized support. School social workers tend to work with kids for whom they've received a referral. So unlike school counselors, their focus tends to be a little more specific to the children. They also do small group. They do lots of individual work, as we're going to see in a data slide in a minute. They take the lead on self-harm and threats to others threat assessments. They tend to lead along with the counselors and the school nurses when it comes to crisis. And their job really is to remove barriers, especially mental health barriers, because children can't learn when they're hungry. Children can't learn when they're worried about where they're going to lay their head tonight, and children can't learn when they're facing the signs or symptoms of a mental illness. And so our social workers, our school nurses, and our school counselors are all hard at work removing those barriers. I think I'm going to stop right here, because this is a lot right now, and ask if the board has any questions about the various roles that student services folks play in our schools.
You haven't mentioned social media and the effect that it has on our students in our schools. Can you address that?
Sure, Mr. Bridges, and thank you for that good question. Let me go back to our risk factors. So that third bullet down is especially where the social media tends to come into play with our young people. I hear so many reports from folks in my department and across the community, our partners that we're going to talk about in a second, that social media puts out an idealized, unrealistic vision or goal for children, and it's really hard for them to live up to that. And there are disruptive aspects of social media that tend to get in the way of children just growing up and learning at a more natural pace what they're good at and maybe what they're not so good at. I think it forces the issue and it brings things maybe home to children in a way that they can't escape from because social media is on 24/7, right? There is something in sociology called the looking glass theory, where what I think of myself comes a lot from what I think I see reflected back at me from the people that I'm interacting with. For example, if I'm in a classroom and I hear my teacher say, well, Matt, you're super clever, and that's really creative, then I might be more likely to think of myself as a creative, clever person. But it works in reverse too. And so many of the social media messages are negative, and that's what many of our young people are seeing reflected right back at them, right? And so I really feel like social media is an issue. We also have kids that turn to social media as a way of medicating their own symptoms, whether that be anxiety or depression. And sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes we do find great resources online, and children, of course, are resourceful, and sometimes they come across exactly what it is that they need. But many times when a child is looking for help online, that's not what they find. They find something that maybe makes their problem worse. Other questions about the roles of the folks in the department? So we don't do this work alone, right? So blessed to be in this community with so many great partners. This slide almost did not make the cut. Did a little hashing with the department about who should be included in this slide. Really, it's one of those things like, who do I put up here because I'm going to leave somebody out, right? It had been the whole presentation for us to talk about all of our partners. But these are the folks that we want to thank especially because their work is so important when it comes to specifically the mental health of our children and families. In specifics, I'd like to talk about the Partnership for Health, which is under the P banner there, and about our folks at Department of Social Services, because I think these are maybe not as well-known aspects of the support that we are getting here in Henderson County Schools for the children and families that are facing this issue. So there's a group called the Mental Health Summit. That's both hospitals, all of our mental health providers, the health department, many of our most well-trained and insightful folks when it comes to mental health are part of the Mental Health Summit. And that's been around for a long time. And it's a go-to place for me and my team when we need a resource that we're not immediately able to put our hands on. We can go to the Mental Health Summit participants, and many times they will be able to help us. There are task forces that have come out of the Partnership for Health. Of course, there's a mental health task force, that's the summit. Then there's also Commissioner Lapsley's original substance misuse task force that has morphed into a second one, and we appreciate all the work that the commissioners are doing around that. Physical activity and nutrition, affordable housing, and interpersonal violence. Of course, all of those things that are task force items have come out of the community health assessment, which is a perennial process that happens in our community where we specifically identify what needs attention when it comes to health and wellness in our community. And it's not a surprise that the priorities from the community health assessment are mental health related. Mental health, substance misuse, physical activity and nutrition, affordable housing, and interpersonal violence. All of those things, of course, contribute to the health and wellness of our children. The other one I wanted to mention real quick was the Henderson County Department of Social Services. They participate, along with our other partners, in our foster care kids. They are increasingly asking for our involvement in their in-home and investigation cases, which helps us to get ahead of the curve a little bit. When a child has something disruptive happening in their family, we're able to kind of come alongside social services in a way that is beneficial to both finding a great outcome for that child, but also supporting that child at home and at school. We have something called the Child Fatality Team. Most folks do not know that every child under the age of 18 who dies in Henderson County, actually all 100 counties in North Carolina, they're required to have their case examined by a multidisciplinary group of folks from the community. I'm grateful to sit on behalf of the school system on that. And of course, what we find are deaths that are related to mental illness in that group. And so that Child Fatality Team's purpose is to do kind of what we're doing tonight, which is to look at situations and ask ourselves as a community, how do we do better? How do we make our kids safer? So I want to call that group out. There's also something called the Child Protection Team. That's where DSS brings a particularly problematic situation that they're dealing with to that same kind of multidisciplinary team. And we're able to examine that from the school's perspective. It really helps us and our team and the educators with whom we work when we learn more about those situations in that family. And so I'm real grateful for that. And then, of course, there's permanency planning, which we are often involved in, especially when children who are in foster care are also public school students. Again, I want to just say we love our partners, so many partners and so much good work. So we are also in a school system where our school counselors and our social workers, our school nurses are keeping really good data. So I thought it might be important tonight to share a little bit of that data with you guys. So this is a sample school counselors data. This is just one school's worth of data. And what you can see is that in just 1 year, the amount of time that this school counselor has logged in a critical incident or a crisis with students has gone from 11% of her particular day to 16% of her day. So we talk about it's a worsening mental health crisis. And so we're not surprised to see it in the numbers, but I think it's also affirming to see in the numbers what we feel is happening in our schools. That school counselors, not just this one counselor, but across the board, are spending more time in critical incidents with children or crisis. That's defined as those things that are listed there in the bullets. It's also interesting that when I had further conversation with this particular school counselor, that about 20% of her time is spent with under or fewer than 10 kids. So when you think about the scarce resource that is a school counselor, and the fact that there are such needy children in our schools, that she spends so much time with just a handful of kids, it goes to both, like how grateful we are that we have those school counselors. It goes to the idea that our children are super, they have a lot of needs that they have to meet. And it also goes to show us that it's the school where many of these services really come to fruition for kids. And so I'm grateful for her. The other thing that I got from this particular school counselor's data is that she has spent 42% of her time with children on things that are mental health. Maybe we start at the bottom of the slide. If we look at the 4 bullets at the bottom of the slide, these are the things that she's doing in addition to mental health. And look at that list. I'm thinking back to my time with Mr. Bridges as a school counselor. This is what we did back then, right? Academic skills, talking to kids about their families, helping kids get along with each other, helping them be organized and manage their time, because being in school is hard. Those are the other things that this school counselor is doing, but she's spending almost half of her time working with her students in mental health. I feel like that's both a sobering thought, but I'm also grateful to have such great counselors doing this great work. Any questions about the school counselor data? Of course, when I reached out to all the school counselors, they all are so forthcoming with their data. And I did have one middle school counselor say that they have done 42 suicide assessments in just this year in one of our middle schools. The crisis is really palpable in our team. The social workers also are great at keeping data. This is a lot of data. So unlike that previous two slides where we were talking about one school counselor, this is data that's coming from all 18 basically of our school social workers. It's more maybe meta in its approach, but we've logged more than 3,400, almost 3,500 interactions. Now, this is not use of time data. This is school social workers logging what they did when they talked to Chris Campbell, logging what they did when they talked to Kathy in third grade, right? So what they're telling us is that when they are working with children, 45% of those children are not in one of those other groups. So if you look at the other groups, truant, attendance, foster, homeless, migrant, second language, exceptional children, right? What this tells us is that even our successful students, even our students who present at school as if they're doing well, always aren't. It's not always the case that our children are having success at school, but don't need that support. 45% of our interactions from school social workers are with the everyday kid that might not fall in one of those other categories. I just also want to acknowledge that these percentages don't add up to 100%, because many times the attendance concern is the child who's also foster. The attendance concern is also a kid who might be special ed. And so when the social workers are collecting their data, it's not like they choose the first box or the second box. Of course, they're checking all the boxes that apply. So when they work with our children, when they've logged these 3,488 interactions, what has it been that the child has expressed the need for? So you'll see the very first category there, the highest percent, is on school success. Well, no surprise here. The things that our social workers and counselors and nurses are working with kids on affect their school success. So our social workers are acknowledging the fact that, hey, when I'm working with a kid on mental health, which is the second most populated bar in the bar graph, that's also tied up with that school, with that student's success, right? An at-risk check-in, it might be because the school social worker wants to know if the family's getting the Friday food bag that they're delivering to classrooms, but it also might be, how did your appointment last week go, right? How about your attendance? So what we find in our students is that we don't distribute the needs equally. It's not like our 13,000 students walk into the school and then by a lottery system, they get their challenge, they get their barrier, they get their disability, right? What happens with the children that Student Services tends to serve a lot is that the needs are piled one on top of the other. It's just not fair, right? And what we see in the data is exactly that. When students are talking about, this is my main issue, the social worker is saying, but I know you've got all these other things going on too. So our children are leading very difficult and complicated lives sometimes, and we're grateful for the support. This is the last of the data slides. So just like the school counselor data, what this is showing is that our school social workers are working with individual children an awful lot. Our children need specific interventions. And just like I mentioned earlier, one size fits one. So it's probably no surprise that our school social workers are working with children individually because maybe that child is the only one with that particular instance, or maybe there's something special about the interventions that we're putting into place for that kid. So in terms of how our social workers are interacting with the children, a lot of times it's interventions with that particular child, but you can see that we've done 1,250 so far this year, 1,250 home visits or phone calls with families. They're not logging just the everyday phone call. These are more significant phone calls that we're making to the house. They're logging so much time supporting families because, as we know in this room, the family system is going to be also important when it comes to school. And just like we know as parents, what happens at school affects us at home, and as educators, we know what happens at home affects the school. And so I'm grateful for our school social workers and others to make all these home visits. I think the other highlight here is look at how powerfully our social workers are working with their teaching colleagues and their administrators. 1,136 team communications. Let me pause right there and see if you guys have any questions about the data itself. I know that can be overwhelming.
Mr. Grube, I don't have any questions about the data, but however, your presentation was excellent. And I think it would be wonderful if every parent in Henderson County heard this presentation that we've heard this evening. I began teaching a few years ago, and at that time, we only had one nurse in the whole county, no social workers in the school system, no SROs in the school system. However, our students in Henderson County have every possible resource available to them if they need help. And thank you for your student services program, and thank Henderson County for supporting you in that program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bridges. Of course, boss, I'm overthinking. Does that mean that I should conclude, or should I do my final slides? Okay, great. So here are some tools that we use, right? We use threat and safety assessments when children threaten harm to others, right? That is a process that happens subsequent to the school discipline. So this is happening on top of whatever that principal or assistant principal is doing because of the incident that gave rise, right? We also have adopted the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. This, I think, is a big win for us because now everyone in the school system, all the social workers, all the school counselors, all of our school nurses, everyone who does a suicide assessment, right, is using the same tool, a research-backed tool that is widely accepted in the field, and I'm grateful for that. Because mental health often has a nexus at school, we often are helping kids with what's called, in our world, a safety plan. Now, I'll never forget when I was presenting to the school counselors early on with student services, right? And I mentioned safety plans, and they said, Mr. Grubmeyer, like, when are we going to have to do a safety plan? Because we could be doing safety plans literally all day long. And my answer remains the same 6 years later. If we as a school system think that we can improve things for children by changing what we do at school, then let's do a safety plan. Let's write it down, and let's document what we're doing for the child, and let's share it with all of the folks, teachers included, who need to be part of that plan. Sometimes a school safety plan includes a re-entry plan. That's at the bottom right of the slide, right? And so when we do a re-entry plan, it's because the child has had either a lengthy absence or an absence for something that we know is significant in that child's life. For example, a mental health hospitalization, an inpatient treatment facility, right? 2 weeks out because there has been a trip to Mexico for a funeral, the child's coming back. So when we do reentry plans, what it allows us to do is to be real intentional about how we're going to get in front of that now with that child so that the cycle doesn't continue. I remember the old days, and I think I was a principal who cared about his kids and knew when children were missing. I would go find a kid and say, "Where have you been?" And the child would say, "Well, I was in the hospital," right? Well, that still happens. But hopefully now, when we do a reentry plan, we can communicate with everyone in the school, right, what's important to change so that we can maybe keep that child in school now and maybe lengthen the time between now and the next miss or the next absence. And then, of course, as we have had so many times in the past, recent past, we have what's called a crisis response plan. I want to thank Susan Guerin because she's been doing this work for as long as I've known this work to get done. And she and I lead the crisis response team. When something happens in the community that we think will affect the mental health of a school building, school teachers, and their students, then we will do a crisis response plan. Here's some of the professional development that we've done. We've done so much professional development, but these are really the highlights for what everyone on the team has done. We were lucky to get training about the Columbia Suicide Screener from one of its authors at Columbia University. He actually has family in Tryon, so for a little while I thought maybe we were going to get a personal visit from him and an in-person training, which would have been great, but it was right during COVID, and so we ended up having an online training, actually 2 of them, but that's the first thing up there. I really appreciate Kimbrell and the superintendent and everyone else who's gotten behind the Youth Mental Health First Aid Program. We're going on 850 people right now that have received either youth mental health first aid training or trauma-sensitive schools training, which we were doing in conjunction with mental health first aid back in the day. So we're hoping to get to 1,000 interactions on that training this year, and I appreciate everybody who's been pushing that effort. And then, of course, I'm grateful also for the legislature. We don't always say that in this room, right? I'm grateful for the legislature who has made training required for all school staff in the areas that are mentioned in that third bullet, or in that third section.
I have a question. First of all, thank you, first of all, for getting all of this data together, but a lot of the data assumes that the student is identified and not flying under the radar, correct? I mean, if a student does not reach out for help, or there has not been an incident that has called the social workers, counselors, or nurses' attention to it, how many students are not, equipped to advocate for themselves and come and say, I need help, I'm suffering?
So I think that question, I hate to admit this, but that question is probably impossible to answer, right? I do know for certain that we're missing kids. One of the social workers that's with us tonight told me a story that I'll never forget. She was a 2-day-a-week elementary school social worker. And when I asked her about splitting her time, how is that being, this was early on in student services, how is it splitting your time between two schools? She said the worst part is when the kids see me at the end of the day, and these elementary kids see her at the end of the day, and they run up and hug my leg. I thought you were going to come talk to me today. Right? So that gives us a signal that tells that really skillful social worker, this is a kid I need to catch up with next time I'm here. But we know that that happens with or without the hug. We know that there are children wishing that they could have more interaction with their counselors and their social workers.
So do we have enough? I guess that was my next question. Even with all these wonderful additions that we've had with the additional school nurses and social workers, are there enough, looking at the very alarming numbers that you've given us?
So I want to be careful on how I answer that. Here's what I think would really benefit us. I think it would really benefit us to have a social worker in a school 5 days a week. Kind of like it's been so helpful to have a school nurse in the school 5 days a week. One thing that might happen, and I'm talking about my own daughter, Gracie, who graduated from Hendersonville High School a few years ago. Let's say that she goes into crisis on Thursday, but it's Tuesday and Wednesday that are the social work days. She might even have a great relationship with her social worker, but her crisis is on a day where that social worker is at her elementary school, right? So Gracie, who had great relationships across the school, would have found somebody to talk to. But how much better would it be if she could find the same person that she talked to last time she had a crisis? I think that would be one huge advantage. I think the other advantage, as much as I have loved the fact that all of our social workers have had to learn more than one grade span, what a great benefit it would be, what a great next step if our school social workers could all specialize in their grade span. And so if we were to say add 4 more social workers, what that would allow us to do is every high school and every middle school has its own social worker 5 days a week. And I think that that would go a long way to addressing the gap that I think you're asking about. Just a couple more slides here. I think actually you guys have handouts on these because they're impossible to read on the screen, but I appreciate Mr. Bridges' question about families, right? If you look at the paper that's on the top of your packet, it's the one that's on the right-hand side of the screen up here, we are trying hard to communicate with our families about, hey, this is what to look for when you're a mom. This is what to look for when you're a grandfather raising children. Because we know that children's personalities change, they have good days, they have bad days. All of those things can disguise what it might look like when young people are facing a mental health crisis or challenge. But we love this document because it helps parents go towards that. And then, of course, you can also see that there are some resources that are listed on that. And then, as evidenced by our so frequent interactions with folks in our community, that document on the left, the color-coded one that I think comes second in your packet, that's the result of a collaboration with especially the health department and the public information office here for Henderson County Schools. Of course, it's only accurate the day it's put on paper, and then it's not accurate anymore because of the turnover and the folks that are coming into and out of the mental health business, right? But what a great document to have so that families who are looking for help at least have a place to start.
I agree with that assessment, especially for that second sheet. Because I actually had two parents reach out to me after a student at West Henderson say, my son, my daughter has experienced this. Who do I call? What do I do? And so I would ask that we get this put out really, I mean, once a quarter. You know, parents aren't going to, it's one of those things you see in your packet, your kid's packet, especially elementary school, there's a tons of things that come. You're like, okay, great, whatever. But when you need it, right? So I want to make sure that we get that on our website, that we distribute it, because when you are in an emergency or you're in a, your child's having some type of trauma or some type of issue, having somebody to call would be very helpful.
And Mr. Craven, what I'll add to that, and thank you for that, but what I'll add to that is if when we put that out, if we can also say that school folks are available to assist with this, because what we know is true is that not every door opens for every family. There are so many barriers, insurance, logistics, all of the things, age, co-occurring conditions. There's a lot of reasons that something on that sheet might look like a good solution right now, but once we make the phone call, it's not. But what we have, of course, is a really well-trained student services group who knows more about these resources and can help families navigate it. Because what we know for sure is that some of our families who are really struggling to make it day to day, one wrong door, one door closed in their face, might mean that they don't look for a second door. And that's where so many of us can step in and help, because we can help direct them to the second or the third option. The last slide is just about our path forward. I think this previews what we're going to hear from next in terms of late bus transportation. I also think when we look at these bullets, it feels nice to me as the Director of Student Services. I hope it feels good to you as a board, because I feel like while we're not fixing every single thing in our community, I think this list from the Surgeon General outlines what we should be doing, and these are the things that we're working on. Thank you for that long presentation. Be happy to answer any other questions that you have.
I've got some questions for these folks. So Mr. Grummeyer, you know, you would think that having a school social worker in every school would be helpful, and I do as well. But we know right now we're paying for some of those folks with ESSER dollars. I don't know how many people are we paying through ESSER dollars? Does anybody have that off the top of their head right now?
I think we do. I think we can at least come close, Mr. Craven. I think there are 5 social workers being paid with ESSER money, and I think there are
5 of the 13 or 18?
5 of the 18, yes, sir. And then I think there are 2 maybe school counselors that are on ESSER funds. Is that correct, Mr. Socia? Out of other ESSER funds. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Grummeyer.
Thank you.
One thing is Mr. Grummeyer steps down, so I just want to, again, thanks our folks in student services who are here and those who aren't here. They're doing the lion's share of this work along with our teachers and staff members, and want folks to know that this is very real and something that we are very much trying to address here locally, and really appreciate all of the collective efforts of our community partners, along with our Board of Commissioners and our health department and all of those people that have let us build to where we are, but we can't get satisfied with this resource as it is. We've got to continue to move forward and see what we can do to be proactive. So, Mr. Grummeyer, thank you very much.
And next, building on that, is going to be Commissioner, this is Rebecca McCall, talking about pathways for disconnected youth and her task force. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for having me and adding me to your agenda today. I did not know that that was going to preempt my presentation, so it was actually a good entrance into. First, I'd like to thank you each for your service to our county. Being an elected official is a difficult task. It's not a glory job, as some people might think. There are issues and decisions that we have to make that are difficult most of the time, so thank you for your service to our community. I came before this board, the board that was here at the time, a couple of years ago to present the work of a task force that I participated in 2019 statewide. It was North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, and we developed a pathways for disconnected youth. I had not even heard the term disconnected youth until then. I'm having the same issues. Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Here we go.
So the vision of that task force was to equip all 100 counties to lead local youth toward a meaningful and sustainable future. That sounds kind of easy at the beginning, but it's very a difficult task. The result of that was a report that was compiled pulling together all of the programs that are available throughout the different counties that focus on disconnected youth. And that report was presented to all the counties, and that's what I did. And after that, I presented that report to this board. So what is a disconnected youth? How do you define that? In fact, the terminology has been changed to opportunity youth. But to me, that just doesn't explain it well enough, because all youth are an opportunity, but not all youth have disconnected themselves. And disconnected youth are defined as those who are age 16 to 19. They're not in school and they're not working. And the staggering statistics show that if they don't get into the workforce and they remain out of it, then we have a national annual cost of $93 billion because of lost revenue and increased social services, as we've talked about today. And the problem doesn't affect just low-income families, but it does affect them the most. But it can affect any family. It can affect any family in this room for whatever reason. And there are multiple reasons behind it. So if we look at statewide, 9.6% of our youth that fall within that age group are considered disconnected. That's almost 10% of our age, of those kids in this state are disconnected. What about Henderson County? Well, in 2017, we showed 325, which was 7%. 200 in 2020, 370, which was 8%. And in 2022, we jumped up to 10%. Now, COVID may have had an effect on it, and it probably did, but the numbers are rising in our county, and that's not a good thing. Our 10% is the same as where we are statewide. And if we look at who we are as a county, we should not be there. We should be below that average for the statewide average. More statistics in our county: 25% of Henderson County youth have a parent previously or currently incarcerated. 53% of our youth are being raised by a single mother. That's a huge number, a huge number. 7% of youth are being raised by a single father. 14% are being raised by grandparents. And in the 2021 school year, 323 high school or Henderson County students were considered homeless. Now, we know that homeless doesn't mean they're sleeping on the street, but it does mean that they're not sleeping in the home that they listed as their residence. They're either,
I've got a question.
okay,
On those stats, is that of the disconnected youth that you're talking
No.
about? That's across the board.
that's across the board. So in October 2021, I was finally able to put together a Henderson County task force. And I just want to go through and recognize each member, because this is a very impressive list of people who have spent the last 2 years, basically, a year and a half, 25 meetings later, coming together almost twice a month. We did take a break in the summer, but talking about this problem. From DSS, if they're here, I want them to stand. I I know most of them weren't able to come today, but from DSS, we had Tim Ziffer, Hugh Rutledge, and Lindsay Murray. Tim and Lindsay both deal directly with that age group in DSS, and Hugh has since retired. From the school system and the Board of Education, I want to thank Stacy Caskey, and I misspelled your name, I'm sorry. I had it right, and I took out the E. She was on our task force until December, and then Sheila Dale joined us. Matt Grubmeyer, Tammy George, and Maricela Gillian. And the last two are counselors, right?
The last two in the list there,
Yeah,
they're job coaches,
yeah.
so they recover dropouts.
From Blue Ridge Community College, Shanda Bedouin and Kirsten Bunch. And Kirsten is here. Thank you. From Child and Foster Care, Tanya Blackford with Crossnor, Alex Williams with Fostering Hopes, and Jamie Weiner with Children and Family Resource Center. Is Jamie here? Okay. In mental health, we have Angela Garner with VIA and Jody Grabowski with Henderson County Health Services. From the YMCA, Lori K. Padden and Roger Reed. From Henderson County Parks and Rec, Bruce Gillum and Melanie Adams, who also was part of the school system before they both retired.
I wasn't a very good standing up, Bruce. It's been a long day. It has been a long day. There you go, Bruce.
And last but not least, Chuck Taylor, our SRO. I was hoping he'd wear his SRO uniform so he could look more intimidating. And Emily Martin with the Partnership for Economic Development. So you didn't speed to get here, did you? He's wearing those cool glasses because he just came from the eye doctor. So we spent a lot of time talking about the problem. And we determined, we kept coming back to this, that the problem we determined was a steady decline of core family and family values, as well as loss of community connectivity, has resulted in an increase of disconnected youth in Henderson County and North Carolina. Everything we talked about, everything we looked at came back to this as a problem. And in those 25 meetings, we didn't just talk amongst ourselves. We had a lot of different groups come in and present to us. We learned about things going on in this county that none of us even knew about. And the DSS folks took away some valuable connections and resources that they could share with the people that they deal with every day. So our determination, and this was many thanks to our SRO Chuck Taylor and our Parks and Rec person, director, Bruce Gillum, was that we need to provide every middle and high school age student the opportunity to participate in after-school programs. You know, I think sometimes we take that for granted. I have a granddaughter who's a cheerleader. I have my other grandchildren are involved in sports, in clubs, in theater, in music, all kind of stuff. And yes, I'm usually the taxi. But they have the opportunity to do that. And there are students that would like to participate, and maybe it's just help with homework, get some tutoring, use the computers at school because they don't have internet at home. But they can't because they have to get on that yellow bus and find their way home because nobody's going to come pick them up at 4, 4:30, or 5 o'clock, or whenever the time is. To think that we are denying children the opportunity to do this just because of transportation was heartbreaking. The benefits for students being involved in these things are improve academic performance, explore interests that they didn't know about before, life and social opportunities. It's a safer environment for some of them. Promote healthy habits and fitness. Encourage a brighter future. Promote self-confidence and higher self-esteem. What about the resumes and their university applications? You know, this will come at the end of the presentation, but I recently learned about a program where they help them fill out the FAFSA. And I can't even say it, much less fill it out. And if you've ever tried to do that, you know what I'm talking about. I had to do it 3 times. and I still don't get it. But there are a lot of studies online about this, about students' participation after school and how beneficial that can be to those students. And the quote that I took from one of those studies was, "Every leading study regarding the impact of extracurricular activity on child development shows that academic grades, study habits, and school-based behavior all improve when children attend regular after-school clubs, sports, etc." So our recommendation is to provide transportation for students who are unable to participate in after-school activities because they do not have a ride home. Now, we do understand that there is a cost involved. We are smart people. We understand there's always numbers. Who was it said it's not about the money, but it's about the money?
Yeah.
And I have given this presentation to the Board of Commissioners. And thank you to Mr. Grubmeyer for coming up with these numbers. I don't think he did it alone. I think he had some help. But to provide the buses for 9 schools, an average of 45 minutes per day, 180 days in the school year, we are looking at $470,000, let's just call it $500,000 a year. Because there's a cost to use those buses. They're state-owned buses. And you have to have approved drivers with CDL licenses. So I presented this to our superintendent and his staff, and they came up with an alternative. If we were to change those buses into minivans, staff can drive minivans. They would be available for additional trips during the day, and we could provide transportation for 17 mothers, not 17, but 17 mothers who have to take their babies with them when they go to school, but they drop them off at the daycare at Blue Ridge Community College because they're going to the Innovative High School. Yeah. And look at the cost. What does that do to the cost? Well, if we bought 5 vans, and I do know that this number is correct, $37,000. I won't tell you how I got that number, but I got that number, and it's number. The fuel, the insurance, and the staff overtime to drive them. And we don't have to have those special CDL licensed drivers. We're looking at a one-time purchase of $185,000, and then maybe have to replace them in, 10 years, whatever, and then $200,000 a year. I'm not asking for anything right now. I'm just sharing information. As I told the commissioners last Monday, I'm not asking for anything right now. But I think if we put our heads together, we can figure out a way to do this together. Before I go on further, I do want to ask a couple of the visitors to get up and share from their experiences. First, I'm going to ask Chuck Taylor to share. He came from Atlanta before he came to Henderson County.
Thank you for letting me speak to you guys today. First of all, I'm appreciative to the hard work this board does. I see it every day, and it goes sometimes unnoticed. So I want to thank you for what you do. What I want to talk to you about, believe it or not, is gun control. Now, what does this have to do with one to the other? I'm going to be brief and I'm going to be quick. If you give a child a choice, and you fill that choice in a glass, you give him gangs, drugs, you give him negative, and the child is thirsty, that's all he's going to drink. That's all he has. But if you give a child a choice, and you give him a glass and it's full of water, love, sports, discipline. And yes, children do want discipline. They might not see it, but they want it. They'll take that glass. Now, we just had a shooting, and the first thing they're talking about is taking guns away. Well, I hate to break the news to you, but if it's not guns, it'll be something. The very first violence at a school in the United States happened when the maintenance guy decided to blow up the school. It was not a gun he used. Those people who want to do violence will continue to do violence. How do we get rid of the gun problem? We start here. Now, what this bus does is it gives these children an opportunity Every child that I come across, it's the reoccurring problem. No father in the house, no family structure. When I ask them, do you play football, baseball, band, choir? Nope. Nope. Nope, I don't do any of that. You've given him that glass, and he's drinking the only thing that he has. So the solution is, and I hate to say this, but we have to start raising other people's children. We have to start being that parent. Now, I can speak to this wholeheartedly because I've raised 5 boys that weren't mine. And I'm proud of all 5 of them. One went, this is the Air Force, he's a captain now. 2 went into the NFL, 3 went into Major League Baseball, and 1 went and became a doctor. Now, was that for me? No, that's for all the people. The only thing I did was beat them when they needed to be beat, fed them when they needed to be fed, took them to the movies when they needed to be taken to the movies. But I was there. Now, what this bus does for someone who rode the late bus, because my mother and father were working. Now, I didn't come from a bad home. It's just that they were so busy working. If it wasn't for the late bus, I wouldn't have been able to play football, baseball, basketball. I wouldn't have been able to be open to the world as it is because of that late bus. Okay? A child can be molded to what you want him to be, but that late bus gives him so much more, or gives her so much more opportunity. That late bus opens the door to cheerleading, it opens the door to choir, it opens the door to a whole different world. So when you look at the money, I'm gonna tell you in my experience, my son's, when he was 17, he played travel ball. And the fees for that travel ball team, I remember it to this day, was $9,000. And I went to the coach and said, $9,000, that's a lot. He said, you should see what a Clemson education costs. Compare that $9,000 to Clemson. Well, my son went to Alabama State, graduated with honors and played 0. The $9,000 was well worth it. It got him his baseball, but the tutoring I paid for helped him academically. But I was there for him. This board has an opportunity to affect positive change by doing something so small as providing a late bus. Because a child will only do what a child's going to do. You hand them that one glass, that's what they'll drink. But if you give a child a choice, they will always choose the education, the love, the discipline. That's what the late bus does. Any questions? No?
Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I appreciate you guys.
Thank you for getting here. I hope you didn't speed on 26. And just briefly, I want to hear from Bruce Gillum.
Hey, good afternoon, school board. Miss you guys. We've been in this task force, and we've been talking about, how to help kids. And I've been, like you guys, we've been on the other side. We've seen a lot of sides, as a assistant principal, first, when you first see this, as far as a late school bus, you start to worry about money. How do you get drivers to come drive the school buses? I think the positives outweigh the negatives. When we start talking about vans instead of having to get CDLs and things like that, this really affected me as a kid when I was growing up. There was no late bus, and there was no way to get to ball games. I was lucky enough. My coach, when I was in middle school, my cousin made the team as well. And I don't know if my cousin maybe should have made the team, but my cousin gave me a ride. Yeah, you know what I mean? So I don't, that was a big deal. But, my coaches took me back and forth to practice, after games. That's why I became a coach and a teacher. And, I am where I am today because of my coaches and my teachers. Those were awesome people in my lives. But looking here and looking at the 16 to 19, and I keep going back through all the data that Mr. Grubmeyer shares, it's all about relationships. If we can get these kids some kind of positive relationship after school, it's a win. And I told the county commissioners, being a principal, if we were able to make this happen, well, it's like Christmas morning for kids. You know, you're going to be able to help every kid in your school. We just built a $935,000 playground, not just for some kids, we built it for all kids. And that excites me. And then that's, you know, all the negative stuff, you know, like, hey, how do we get a van? How do we get a driver? All that stuff will work out. You know, my wife being assistant principal, we talked about this going down the road the other day, and she was like, to be able to have kids stay after school and get their homework done. Just think about this for teachers who could sit in, you know, after school, be able to keep somebody who didn't do their work or maybe needed some extra guidance. It's just a win-win. I know there's some negatives with money and getting this, but I think county commissioners, we presented that to them and with you guys, and hopefully as our partnership goes, we're going to make this happen. And I mean, what can it hurt? You know, like I said, as a principal looking at it the other side, this is probably one of the best things that we can do for our schools, you know, if it's possible. Okay? Thank you.
So I guess that you see that we haven't necessarily looked at how to fix those 10% that are already listed as disconnected, but we want to stop the bleeding. Recently had a little surgery on my arm, and if they hadn't put the stitches in, it never would have stopped bleeding. But the stitches closed it up. We need to close up the problem, and this can help us close up the problem, and it's so simple. So next steps. We started our program by having a visitor from Rutherford County come and talk to us about the McNair Foundation, which was established 30 years ago. And they provide a mentor for every middle and high school student in Rutherford County. There's 3,500 students. They focus on career path planning. They provide scholarship opportunities for those with financial need. And the students are prepared academically for college and financially and a career path. They have it figured out before they, you know, that question, what do you want to major in? How many of you, if I asked how many of you stayed with the major you started with in college, nobody would raise their hand. But it does help them, it does help every student become focused. There's a cost of setup. There's grants, there's state funds, there's endowments, there's business donations, there's the management of the program. The success, we suggest testing at one school, middle and high school. Sheila and I went and visited the program in Rutherford County last week, and we left there ready to get started. We need a meeting, we need to get started because we were excited and we saw how simple it really is once you put the program together. They even sent us their toolkit and said that they would come up and help us get this started. So imagine if we had not just a late bus to allow kids to stay after school, but a tutor, or not a tutor, a mentor for every middle and high school student. Somebody in their life that they meet with once every other month that cares about their future, that can look at their grades and say, you need help with this, maybe we can do something about that. That can talk to them about, what are you interested in? What is your main interest? Well, this would be a great program for you to consider going into, and to help them look towards the future. 30 years of successful program in Rutherford County is amazing. Now, we have 6,000 students that fall in that age group, not 3,500. But we can make it happen with retired teachers. I've already presented this to a very established group of business owners. They're all about it. They want to get involved. They want to be mentors for these kids. One of the requests is that a mentor starts with a 7th grader and stays with them until they graduate high school.
How do you get that many mentors?
Yeah, that was my question, but they just kind of start coming. You know, when I started the task force, I started with about 5 people on my task force. And I was getting emails, I was getting phone calls. I want to participate in this. I want to be a part of this. When you have something this positive, people want to be involved. How many retirees do we have living in this county that are professional people who have very successful careers, that love to talk about their careers and would be willing to sit down with the youth and talk to them? How many retired teachers do we have? How many business people do we have that are willing to allow their employees to take one day a month and meet with a group of kids? It's not one mentor per, it's this mentor probably has 15, 20 kids that they meet with. They meet for 15 minutes at a time. They go to the school. There's a designated area in the school. It's a very structured program. We saw the badges that they wear at the school, the mentors wear at the school, and they get a little pin for every 5 years they've been a mentor. There were badges there that had 4 and 5 pins on them. That's how dedicated these people are. The lady that runs the room where they go and have the sessions, she's been there for 25 years. She's dedicated. They help them do the FAFSA. That in itself is enough. But that is something that we're going to delve into some more. I'm going to come back. Sheila's going to help me, and we're going to present this and our plan for this program. So we're not asking for just the buses. We're asking for, let's start a mentoring program. We started with this on the task force, and then we kind of went, oh, we can do something right away with after-school programs. So we kind of took a little turn and went down that path. But this has brought us back to the mentoring path. So just to leave you, youth with a mentor are 55% more likely to be enrolled in college, 78% more likely to volunteer regularly in their communities, 130% more likely to hold a leadership position in a club or sports team, and 90% of respondents reported being interested in becoming mentors themselves. And that's true. They show that mentors, the children who with mentors become mentors. In fact, there was an intern that met with us last week from UNC Chapel Hill, and she was part of the program. And she's moving in that direction with her career. And the really cool thing that I took away that I didn't know of from before was that the high school students, especially the seniors, go into the elementary schools and become mentors for the kids, the younger students. So this is something I said, we still have some more work to work on, but today was all about the bus program. But tomorrow when I come back, not literally, it'll be about the mentor program. So any questions?
Mrs. McCall, just a couple questions for clarification. When you're talking about a mentoring program and outside adults coming into schools, are we targeting that age group of 16 to 19? Or are we thinking
Oh, no.
middle school?
Start with 7th grade.
Okay.
And follow them all the way through 12th grade, because middle school is the hardest, as most of you probably know. It's the most difficult, isn't it, Bruce?
And there are some grants out there, the 21st Century Community Center Learning Grants. They're very competitive. I don't know if we would qualify to do that. I've looked into it before. But I think we would have to make sure there are enough activities available for our students after school. And so finding resources and places for them to go, because they can't all go to Bruce. You probably can't handle them all.
And one of the things that we talked about a little bit with this group was even in schools, having days where, kids are able to do different things, during the days and being able to be a part of clubs every day. Like one day a month, have club day, just so that these kids are involved into something they feel belonging to something.
Yeah, I don't want to confuse the mentoring program with the after-school program. The after-school program is regular after-school activities.
Right.
The mentoring program will happen during school hours. Kids are called from their class for 15 minutes at a time, once every other month.
I wonder how this differs from Big Brothers and Big Sisters. Is it similar?
It's similar in a way, but Big Brothers Big Sisters gets more intimate, and these mentors don't get intimate in their lives. But if they recognize a problem, then they have a form they can fill out and send it to the school counselor to look into further. But they don't talk about how was your date the other night, and all that. They get more involved in career development or just what's your next steps or getting through high school successfully, that sort of thing. It's all about their academic career. So that's, I think, where the big difference is. And we, Big Brothers Big Sisters, came and talked to our task force. So did the Boys and Girls Club. We have had so many groups, like I said, groups I never even had heard of before that came and spoke to us.
This is awesome work. Thank you.
Thank you. We're not done yet. It's the task force that will never end, but thank you for letting me come and speak.
Two things real quick before you go. One is some of the sports are seasonal. So even if you do play football or do play baseball, you're still going to have a time when you may not have something after school.
Right.
So we just need to look at those areas as well, which I know y'all are. And number two, if someone would have me as a mentor, I would love to sign up. If it's, I mean, I worry about my time, and I know that what everybody else worries about. But if it's one day a month or whatever, I could do that. I know some good, upstanding people that I know would also volunteer that probably don't know about this. So I think you could find enough mentors, and there are 2 or 3 or 4 right here if this is the route we go.
Oh, yes, and they would all be vetted. They would all go through a background check, all of that. We understand the school safety side of it, but we don't want things like that to hold us back from moving forward. Our focus is to make school an awesome experience. When I look back on my school year, I would go back tomorrow if they'd have me. You were talking about the foreign, I call it the foreign exchange student program. I graduated in 1974. That was a long time ago. I still communicate with our student who lives in Spain. We connect through Facebook. We share our grandchildren's pictures and family pictures and stuff like that. So, the school experience needs to be a happy one for all children. And if we can make that experience happier for just a few of that 10% that we saw, and to stop that 10% from growing, we want to bring those numbers down. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair, before we transition, I hope what folks heard tonight is that we starve for connection, and these things that we're talking about, whether it was through our student services, and especially through the disconnected youth. In my experience as a principal, we looked at dropouts and disconnected youth as a very large percentage of a small group of kids, and those are those kids that didn't have something that was holding them in school, and that can be any of a myriad of those extracurricular or co-curricular activities. So if you look at your data, and if we look at our internal data, and you look at ROTC, or you look at FFA, or you look at football, if you're a 4-year participant, you're 100% graduation rate almost every time. Band, 100% graduation rate almost every time. So I really appreciate the work that has been done in the community, externally and internally, to make sure that we're focusing on those student connections, because at the end, when it all boils down, that's what matters, is that connectivity that then improves that academic performance and improves everything else. So Commissioner McCall, thank you for bringing this to our attention and coming in and meeting, and I know we're going to meet again.
All right, moving on to board chair observations. I'm going to pass this month. Board member observations from my left. Anyone? It's number 8. It's board member observations. You get to talk about whatever you want to talk about, if you so choose. Just hit your microphone, if you wouldn't mind.
We got to visit Clear Creek Elementary this past week. I was absolutely blown away, and it was like this realization moment where the school takes on the personality of the leadership there. It was absolutely phenomenal to have let that clicked, and I enjoyed it so much more, and knowing that we have got an amazing system here Can it obviously take some improvement? Yes, but wow. So I just want to say that Clear Creek was just an amazing tour. It was beautiful.
Awesome.
It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would like to say one thing. You know, when I was first running, I really didn't know, I didn't really have a platform. I just wanted to help out. But when I was running for reelection, I continually said that that school education involves reading, writing, math. I mean, let's not go into all this. We need to just, educate our kids, reading, writing, social studies, But, we just heard over an hour and a half of information that other areas that our schools need, our children need, mental health and activities and disconnected youth. And, and I just want to challenge this board and support this board into recognizing school is a whole lot more than math, than English, than reading. I mean, this is developing children into adults, and that involves the nurturing and the mental awareness and just a whole lot more than what I thought it did. So I really appreciate the people coming here and taking time. And I was aware of this, but it's an eye opener, and I really appreciate the people here. And I hope there are people at home were listening, and we're getting quote educated on this. But it's really good. So I really appreciate everybody coming here and taking over an hour and a half of our time, because this was great. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Egoff. Okay. We have 2 public comments today, with the first being Mr. Joe Elliott. Welcome, sir.
I always try to write something close to 3 minutes, and I try to do it so that I make a point.
Sure.
And I honor your time. Today, I'm not going to do that because of the things that have been said. I just like to make a couple of observations. A little background. I spent my career in educational publishing all over the country, all over the world. My sister taught school for 35 years, special needs kids. My oldest daughter is the system administrator for a large school district in Illinois for special needs kids. So it's in my blood, it's in my kids' blood. And I'm retired, and I don't play golf, so I have a lot of time to do things other, and I read a lot about what's going on in education all over the country. One of the things that I did not hear today, among all the good things that were said, is that bullying is a huge issue. I hear it from my daughter. I hear it from my 4 grandkids. It is more than maybe all of us even realize, because a lot of it goes untreated, unsaid. And I think that we need to have a way for kids to speak out about bullying. I hear them come here occasionally and talk about it, but I think that's the tip of the iceberg. The other thing that I wanted to point out is there are tens of thousands of kids right now in the streets over what's happened in schools all over the country, guns. Now, that's not a school district per se, that's not your problem, but we are all citizens, we are all adults, and it is a problem for us. We have got to stop letting our legislatures talk around it. What happened in Tennessee last week was an abomination. They let politics and racism and mansplaining take the place of talking about 6 people killed in a school. And it goes on and on and on. And we're not going to solve it, with all deference, we're not going to solve it by hardening our schools. That person last week in Nashville blew out the door with an AR-15. I don't know how you stop that. And I don't think we should train teachers to be our vigilantes on the ground. We need to address these issues as a country. Enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Next up, Mr. Tabram. Welcome, sir.
So good afternoon, everyone. As Mr. Craven mentioned, my name is Terrell Tay Brown. First and foremost, thanks for hearing me out today. Most importantly, I'd like to thank God for another day of life and the resurrection of his son. I come to you as a concerned and grateful community member. I'm grateful for Henderson County Public Schools and all the amazing things of it. However, I'm also concerned about the young people in our school systems that will one day run our nation. I'm not here to give specifics related to those concerns. Simply put and well said, I'll borrow the words of Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Therefore, I'll give what I believe is the best option, which is to pray. Pray for all of us. Those in attendance, not in attendance, and for the amazing people and children that walk our hallways and school systems. Also, like Matthew 18:20 says, where there are 2 or 3 gathered in my name, there I am with them. So Lord, I come to you today asking for wrath, safety, and love upon all of those near and far. I ask for the wrath you mentioned in Ephesians when women or men go against your word. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Don't be fooled by those who try to excuse these sins, for the anger of God will fall on those who disobey him. I ask you remove, dispel, and correct hearts that are standing against what you have for the well-being of children and staff in our school system. I ask for the safety you mentioned in Psalms 32:7. That safety states, "You are my hiding place. You will protect me from the trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance." I ask that you protect all those in our school system as we face national tragedies related to children in school systems daily. Most importantly, I end this prayer as a prayer of intercession. I intercede on behalf of the school systems and ask for your love to be showered down on families, staff, and children involved in our school system. I ask for the love you mentioned in 1 Corinthians 13:4, the love that is patient, kind, that does not envy, does not boast, is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered, and it keeps no records of wrongs. Love that does not delight in evil, but rejoices in truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Thank you, Lord. And in the powerful name of Jesus, I do pray. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. All right, before moving on, do you guys want to take a quick 5-10 minute break to restrooms, all that? All right, we're going to take a quick 10-minute recess, and then we'll be right back. All right, thank you for sticking with us here. We will continue on. Next up is going to be the consent agenda. You all right over there?
I'm now.
Okay. I will take a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Makes a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nobody can oppose right now. We're eating. All right, old business. Teacher recruitment signing bonus, Mr. Scott Rhodes. Welcome, sir.
So last month, we were asked to come back and bring you a number of what it would have looked like based off the number of folks that we hired after the first day of school that would qualify for a retention bonus, and that number was 17. So we hired 17 permanent full-time staff that would have qualified for this bonus, which would have cost out of federal ESSER dollars $25,500.
Okay.
No, that's not retention, that's new hire, right?
Hire,
New
correct.
hire,
That's basically a look back.
right.
Correct. Yep, that was looking back at the number of folks that we hired after the first day of school.
Questions? All right, so what is your recommendation on this?
Well, I think it's up to the board if you decide that you want to make that request to go past the first day of school. The recommendation would be that we would do that till the end of the first semester. And the reason that we would do that to the end of the first semester is because after we get through the month of December, a lot of the jobs that we post are not permanent full-time positions. We don't do that because we are always shuffling at the end of the year based off of our ADM projections for the following year. So we need to make sure that we have enough open positions if we don't have retirements and resignations, so that we're not ever putting ourselves in a position where we're having to rift employees. And so it depends. But the recommendation would be, if the board wants to do something different, that we would extend that until the end of the first semester, and we would prorate the amount that the employee would receive based on their hire date.
I will say this. The point that I was making last meeting was, if we decide to start this recruitment signing bonus and you were hired a month ago or a week ago, you might be a little sore that you would be missing out on this bonus. However, after further thought, I've also realized that there are other people that support staff. I mean, it just goes on and on about, like, why are you just recruiting teachers? Why are you just paying a signing bonus to teachers? Why are you just going back and paying, what about me? I do this, So I think I'll go back to what was first presented, and that is and this is just how I believe. But just, if we want to just go back, and if we feel like we're having a shortage of teachers, let's just go back and let's just start that from day one, is what I would feel. Because I wouldn't want to include some people going back, but then not include others, and then all of a sudden the pot's too big to fill and we can't do anything. So, did that make sense? You're shaking your head. I don't do well of saying my thoughts.
So are you saying that we need to start this program for 23-24 school year as was presented initially?
However y'all presented it was presented at first, is what I would.
And I would agree with that.
I do as well.
Are there any other comments, suggestions, concerns?
Well, I mean, my comment is I'd love to give every one of the teachers in our school $10 million, but we know that there's always going to be oh wait, but I was hired on December 5th. If I was hired on December 4th, I might have gotten that bonus. It's going to always be like
That's
that,
right.
that cutoff. So, in a world where sometimes a rebate comes out, you and I had talked about this on a car, right?
Yes,
If
ma'am.
somebody comes in 4 months later and says, hey, there's a rebate now, on this Ford, do I get that? Obviously not, because we know that, you have incentives that come down. We just don't have a never-ending supply of money, and when we hear all of our safety needs and all of our needs for other things, I love the idea of recruiting with a bonus. I just don't know about backtracking because I think it's hard
Yes.
to have a cutoff date.
I agree.
Anybody else? Well, then we don't need to do anything else since we have already approved that, and you're good to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up are policy updates. Mr. Carl Taylor, come on down.
Good evening, board members. Tonight I'm back with 3 policies that were discussed at last month's meeting for various reasons. And so the first policy is Policy 6220, Operation of School Nutrition Services. That was an update from the North Carolina School Board Association that was presented last month. There was some question in this policy in regards to the definition of sex that was included in the update that we received. And so I believe Mr. Campbell has some information that he can share with you all as you discuss kind of the next steps with this policy.
Certainly. Good evening, Board. So in Policy 6220, some of the language recommendations, like Mr. Taylor referred to, do include examples of situations in which if discrimination was based on a particular defining characteristic, that could be deemed discrimination under existing law. So it's not a straight definition, but what the School Boards Association chose to do was include some examples. I want to emphasize first and foremost that this is an emerging area of the law, would obviously depend on the facts and circumstances. So this is not a comprehensive list. It's also not a definitive list in terms of being a definition. Again, these are examples depending on facts and circumstances. We reviewed the child nutrition requirements from the federal government. It does not appear to be a requirement that you include this language in your particular policy. The reason to include it would be that you are providing notice to administrators and others in the district that as they enforce these policies, these could be issues in which there could be some form of possible discrimination based on the facts. This is an area of the law that is constantly changing right now and evolving, so would never recommend that you try to include any conclusive definition because of the evolving nature of these particular issues. So the recommendation to keep this language, and again, this is up to you as the board as to whether you keep the language or not, but the recommendation to keep the language to be a little more clear would be at the end of the parenthetical to add the phrase to the extent, or as determined by existing law. So it would be putting administrators on notice that issues of pregnancy, childbirth, sexual orientation, gender identity could be discrimination, but it would be based on or as determined by existing law. So that would be the recommendation for your consideration and your discussion.
Well, your first recommendation was this, because the North Carolina School Boards Association came out with this policy. Your office went through this policy, agreed that this was correct. Our folks went through this policy and then presented it to us. So that was your initial, right?
So, but that's not a change, though. When we're looking at the policies, we're looking to see, do they conform with law? Is there a problem with the policies? And since you brought that up, if you'll just give me 20 seconds to address that further, because it's so important. We always recommend that you not make any changes you don't have to make to North Carolina School Board Association policies. Because every time you make a change, when there is a future revision, somebody's got to go back, look at the Henderson County version, make sure that it's in conformity, and the more changes you make, the more of a burden you put on your staff. That doesn't mean you can't make changes. That is totally up to the Board of Education. So our first look was, does anything in these policies seem to be violated of law or something that needs to be addressed? It does not. And I want to say that, again, this is not a new recommendation. It's a recommendation if the board wants to make a change, if that's clear.
I just wanted to make sure of that.
Sure. If you want to make a change, that would be the backup recommendation.
There you go.
My recommendation is that we just delete the parenthetical clarification phrases.
Okay.
It doesn't
And
break
not add the language that he mentioned?
I don't think if we delete the parenthetical
Yeah,
examples.
if you're going to eliminate the parenthetical, I see no reason to add the additional language. The additional language was just to address kind of the evolving nature of those particular issues.
Since they're
Because
evolving, there is no need to put those in there as examples, in my opinion.
all policies are to be construed according to existing law. That is a true statement.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
So I was the, member that brought this up last time for consideration. I obviously still stick with what I said before. I think everything within the parentheses, the parenthetical language, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think legally it has any issues, so I obviously I would just prefer it out.
Anybody else?
Well, I'm going to agree with that. Like I said, just doesn't make any sense. It's kind of like verbiage that's just kind of, it's redundant and needless, in my opinion.
Is there a motion? No, there
I'm-
wasn't a motion, but
I move that we do not add the parenthetical clarifying identifiers in policy 6220 and paragraph A, number 1.
is there a second?
I second that.
Is there any more discussion on this matter?
Does our attorney want to say something?
No, I just was going to clarify, go ahead and vote on that motion and then vote to approve the policy as amended.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Is there an easier way to do that then?
You could simply withdraw your motion and move that the policy be amended without the inclusion of the parenthetical in paragraph A1.
What Mr. Campbell said is my motion.
Do you have that, Ms. Clayton? Yeah, got it. Okay, is there a second?
I second that.
All right, any other further discussion on this policy 6220 and the parentheticals? I've heard parentheticals more today than I've heard in 10 years. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if it's included in there, I think that the North Carolina School Board Association had a reason for including it in there. And we do pay a lot of money for their advice on making sure that we're staying within the right legal boundaries. So I disagree. I would just approve it the way they presented it.
And that's honestly where I'm at. When we switched to the North Carolina School Board Association, it was a painful process for 2 years to go through every single policy that we had versus what they had, add them in, do the whole thing. And I think it was a 2-year and some change deal. We pay, and I don't remember what the number is, but for them to send us these updates every year and everything, all the ethics training and everything else, I think you're swimming uphill on these things. So we pay them to do all of this stuff. Again, we pay Mr. Campbell and his firm to go over these to make sure they're in compliance. We have admin folks that sit here and look at it, and then they send it to us. I would just say leave it alone. But either way, I'm not going to lose sleep.
Now, I am frequently confused, and I'm confused again.
Yep.
So now, I thought that Dr. Revis said to leave it, and then she made a motion to change it.
No, her motion is to essentially approve the policy, but with the parenthetical. Scroll up to page 2, please. Page 1, yeah, right there. Basically take out, including pregnancy, childbirth, sexual orientation, and gender identity. That parenthetical. Take that out. So we would just read based on race, sex, color, national origin, disability, age. Correct?
Correct. And again, by taking it out, you're not changing the fact that Henderson County Schools will still have a legal obligation to follow the law in those particular areas.
Right. It's just the example that's in there, and to me, it doesn't matter one way or the other. So that was the motion. And so we have a first, we have a second. We're still discussing this motion unless people are done.
Well, I will just say that once you start adding things and taking them out, you're going to forget stuff and you're going to add stuff, and I'll just say remove it all and just go with 6, but whatever.
All right, so we have, anybody else like to discuss it? Yes or no on the motion? Ms. Norman?
Yes, with Dr. Rippus's motion.
Yes or no, Mr. Bridges? No. Yes or no, Mr. Egoff?
Yes, sir.
Yes or no, Ms. Caskey?
No.
Yes or no, Dr. Revis?
Yes.
Yes or no, Ms. Dale?
Thank you, sir. I agree, it needs to go, so yes.
And I'm a no. It passes 4-3. Thank you. Next one, 2200.
Yes, sir. Policy 2200 is the policy that the board discussed last month in regards to election of board chair. And so what I've prepared here is an example of what the policy would look like if the statement about serving 4 consecutive one-year terms as a chairperson are limiting it to that term. So that you can see in the main body, that's what the policy would look like. Out to the side, you can see the deleted part. That is the statement that's currently in our policy that states a board member is limited to serving 4 consecutive one-year terms as chairperson. After serving 4 consecutive terms as chairperson, the member is not eligible to serve as chairperson for a period of 2 years. So again, this is just for your discussion if you want to proceed with removing that portion or not.
So I think I was the one who had brought this one up. It just seemed a little bit of overreach to decide what a future board that might not include any of us gets to do as far as choosing their chairperson. It seemed very arbitrary. I almost feel like it was put in there because of one person.
It was, I mean,
And I don't think a policy should be made because of one person, because every group of 7 people gets to decide and vote for whomever they'd like each year. So why do we need to tell them who they can and cannot vote for?
any other?
When was this decided? Mr. Craven knows.
2017?
So you were on the board.
I was.
So why was this adopted?
Well,
If you remember, I know
well,
it was
I remember.
6 years ago.
I definitely remember. And I think Dr. Revis was actually still here. So the thought was this. The chair before 2016 had been the chair for 18 years. And I don't know if there was a little animosity because of that, or there was whatever because of that. And so this was debated quite a bit. And I think this was it wasn't a consensus. We kind of came to finally an agreement on how to finally get this done, because we were going through 40 policies or so every meeting. It was based on the past board chair being there for 18 years, and no one wanted a board chair there for 18 years. But Stacy's got a good point. I mean, who are you or me or whatever, if we're not on the board in 10 years, to say that that person can't do it or that person? That was the thought then. And I know that it was not unanimous.
And you know what?
It was not a unanimous decision, this particular policy.
One of the things we discussed last board meeting as well was legacy knowledge. Again, everybody still has the right to vote for whomever they'd like as a chairperson, but if we have someone who has been so involved in real estate transactions, financial transactions, budgeting and whatnot, and has all of that legacy knowledge that a new board member or newer board member might not have, why would we say, well, we could vote for anyone except for the person that knows what was going on that deal? It seems arbitrary to me, since everybody could vote anyway.
And this was definitely added in. That's not consistent with the North Carolina School Boards Association model policy.
My only thing was assuming that once a board member, you're a board member for life, that's going to occur. I mean, you're going to have, when people rotate on and off, you're going to have people flying blind. I mean, and to say that, I will say a couple of, just because I appreciate Mr. Craven's leadership for this board, he does have an election coming up in a year and a half. I don't know his plans. He claims that he doesn't know his plans. If he doesn't run, if he's elected as another chair, and if he doesn't run, the next person that does run will not have the experience of a previous board member that's had 4 years on the board. He will not be sitting at this table. And that is the reason I would not want him to be chair again. Because if he's chair again for another year, once December comes around, and if he decides that he does not want to run, he's going to vacate, leave as chair. And we're going to be sitting with people. I mean, I would rather him sit on the board and have some input with a new chair than not have him. So that's my only thing. I certainly, whoever becomes the next chair is going to have some huge shoes to fill. It's a big responsibility. But I would want Mr. Craven sitting on the board saying, giving some input, you know, on how to be a good chair.
Yeah.
So to say.
I think along those lines, y'all are both saying the same things. It's just different way. It's either you do that through the vote of the board, or you do that by proxy of a policy that makes it that way. So it's two different ways to do it.
And it is correct to say it's not binding because the majority of the board can change policy at any time.
It's true.
And the majority of the board can vote
For whoever they want, anything.
whoever they want. I tell you what, I like change, and I know that's not typical, but I always like change, well thought out change. But I think we have the option as a board member to nominate our, slate of officers every year. And so then we can vote. I kind of like term limits though as well, because I think sometimes change is needed. But if that be this case, if we as a board feel that we want to change and not have Blair again, Blair, you're in the limelight here, and I
I'm
apologize,
getting
but
shot from everywhere.
yeah, but then we can make that change.
Yep.
So
Right, all it takes to make that change would be 4 votes for a different person,
exactly.
each December.
So is this your 4th year as chair? Is that what I'm gathering?
This is
Forgive me,
my
I don't
4th
remember.
year as chair.
Okay, so this would directly affect next year okay.
It would, it could affect a lot of years, or
Well, correct, but I feel like we're discussing it in preparation for next.
sure.
Is the vibe that I'm getting?
Just talk about you, right?
Just-
I
just was trying to clarify. I assumed that was the case. I obviously was just clarifying.
Yeah, I mean, to say it's awkward is,
A little awkward.
yeah, and I was the only one that was here when we were doing this, and I get that I understood at that particular time, like, why we were doing it. There was a lot of animosity and a lot of different parts and points, and we were going through this process of looking at every single policy from the 1,000s to the 9,000s, and it was like, no. Whatever, if you want, yes.
I'd like to know who came up with the 4-year.
It was between Mrs. Holt, Coach Wood, Mrs. Korn, Mr. Corin, Absher,
Is there a magic
and
number
Lisa
about
and Miss
4?
Edwards. I don't even know how it came up there. Listen, I know that we sat here like
That's our turn.
an hour and a half talking about this thing, and I think finally at the end that people are just like, whatever, put some numbers down to it, don't care. So leave it as it is, change it.
I'm going to remove you from the hot seat because I didn't mean to bring this up and put you in this weird position that we're really not talking about if we want Blair to be our chairperson. I'm Mr. Craven, I'm sorry, to be our chairperson next year or not, because we each have a vote for that next year. We'll all still be here next year. It's just, why do we, have a vote if we say, well, you could vote for everyone except, Mr. Bridges, or you could vote for anyone except Ms. Norman. I just think that we should.
Well, that was why I brought up my scenario.
And I
If he
understood what you're
chooses to
saying.
run again, and if he chooses to run for the board chair again, and then he is for another year, and then if he chooses not to run again, we won't have his expertise and his experience, and that would be a detriment to the board or the new board chair, was my point.
But he may not get elected.
Absolutely.
He may not run.
Or he may not run.
That's what I said.
Quick-
Is that my
quick-
kid's baseball game right now?
Quick point of order for my,
Be rescued, I agree.
yeah.
I just,
Yeah,
can we just vote on the
yeah.
damn thing?
Yeah,
It's just-
and that's what I was going to ask real quick. There was no proposed change. This was just a question. So there would need to be a motion to change it.
That's not true, because this is the second month that we did it.
No, but was there a proposed change put forward by somebody and voted on as a first reading?
No, we didn't vote.
You told, no.
Oh, no,
We
what-
didn't have to. We have to look at the policy for 1 month and then have to come back.
So what I'm asking is normally you get a recommendation from the School Boards Association to change policy. I'm not hearing that this is a recommendation. So simply there would just need to be a motion to amend it. If there's no motion, it stays.
To amend, or not a motion to amend.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't have to have a motion not to amend.
Is there a motion or not?
I'm going to move, I move that the Henderson County Board of Public Education approve policy 2200 as presented, which removes the language that limits the number of consecutive terms that a board member may serve as chairperson.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Motion fails. Are there any other motions? Moving on. All right, approval of policy 3220.
Yes, sir. So this is policy 3220, technology in the educational program. And so at last month's meeting, there was a question in regards to the second paragraph where the sentence has changed, the ending of the first sentence has changed. The recommended update states at the end, and to prepare students to be successful in college and careers and as globally engaged, productive citizens. And so the question was just as to why that wording was put in place of the part that was deleted and that you can see out to the side. Mr. Campbell, do you have some information that you can share with that now?
Simply that language is in the North Carolina Digital Teaching and Learning Standards that were recommended by the State Board of Education and the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. It's not a legal requirement.
So I can start the discussion here, if that's okay, if I may. Based on what we have just heard today with the presentation of the disconnected youth, the deleted sentence says such technologies will also be used to support programs and activities that promote safe schools and healthy and responsible students. I would like to keep that sentence instead of saying, I'm okay with to prepare students to be successful in college, careers. I am not okay with and as globally engaged, productive citizens. I am not okay with that. We are, if they want to go and be globally productive citizens after we educate them, great. But we are educating students to promote safe schools, healthy and responsible students. That's our job.
Any comments, concerns, issues, questions? Is there a motion?
I don't think that's our only job. I think we have to prepare students, obviously, for careers. I'm sorry, I'm just getting over bronchitis. I mean, I don't understand why, like, I don't know if, like, one needs to exclude the other. I understand, I agree with everything you said about what we should be preparing our students to do, but, you know, everyone always says you're only as successful as your day after graduation. I think that this kind of, I think it behooves us to create productive, globally engaged citizens, you know, as part.
I don't see any point in changing this at all. I'd say leave it, but I did that for the last two, so. Any other questions?
Is this another recommendation from the School Board Association? All the changes in red, I'm assuming, correct?
Yes, and again, I think they've substituted language from the state board and DPI's digital learning plan. That's where it came from.
Anybody else? I move that the Henderson County Board of Public Education approve policy 3220, technology in the educational program as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other further discussion on this motion that's been made or this policy? If there is none, we'll do a voice vote. Ms. Norman, yes or no on my motion?
Yes.
Yes or no, Mr. Bridges? Yes or no, Mr. Egoff?
Yes, sir.
Yes or no, Ms. Caskey?
Yes.
Dr. Ravis?
Yes.
Ms. Dale?
No.
And I'm a yes, passes 6-1. Thank you. All right. Next up, Berkeley property update. I'll let, is this Mr. Garrett or Mr. Campbell?
Well, I'll just give a nice lead into the counselor. I attended the last Board of Commissioners meeting where they had on their agenda to not accept the property or to move on the property that you've declared surplus at your previously. So that opens up the door to complete the remainder of the Berkeley acquisition with the city if you so choose as a board. And I know Mr. Campbell has some information on that.
Sure. Just as a reminder, board members, by agreement dated November 28th of 2022, you agreed with the city of Hendersonville to do two things regarding Berkeley Park. One was an immediate exchange with Edwards Park for 16 acres out at the Berkeley Park property. That particular transaction has been consummated and closed, and you are the owners of that 16 acres. The agreement also included an option for what's called the Berkeley Remainder Tract, and that's the additional 21.34 acres, which is to the south at the Berkeley Park area, right below the 16 acres that you currently own. So this option is now ripe for you to exercise. The city is not moving forward with economic development initiatives with that property. So you already have agreed to have the option. So tonight's action would be for you to authorize the chair and the superintendent to close on the additional 21.34 acres, to execute all necessary documents, and to commission a survey to be recorded if needed in the public registry. And that's something we'll decide by virtue of the title search to see if we need a survey also on the property. Just very quickly, you're also agreeing to give the county, give the city a 30-foot greenway easement around the entire perimeter, including another 10 feet for construction of that particular greenway easement. If it is constructed, and there's no requirement that the city actually construct a greenway, but if they do, it will also be available for your cross-country teams out there on the property. The city retains an access easement across the entire tract for utilities, greenway easements, and maintenance of the utility meter that's out there. You're also responsible for procuring the survey if you decide to do so. You are swapping that particular property with the 1 acre that is right here behind the central office. The city will have the right to use that or to allow public use of that between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. only. They can have supervised events after 7 p.m. on the track here behind the central office with advance notice to the superintendent. Out there at the Berkeley property, you are to give public access, including any tennis courts that may be constructed, but that does exclude any baseball or other athletic fields that you tend to construct out there on the property. So at this point, and the additional consideration for the exchange is $350,000 from this board to the city of Hendersonville. And you'll remember in the first phase of the exchange, you received $250,000 from the city of Hendersonville for the exchange that involved Edwards Park. So, Mr. Chair, unless there are questions, I'm happy to answer them, but it would be appropriate to get a motion to authorize the chair and superintendent to exercise the option and to execute all necessary documents, including a survey if necessary.
So this is kind of the culmination of 2-3 years worth of actual work to get this project done. And there are a lot of steps from, economic development coming in, not coming in, surplus property, you never know what's going to happen with that type of deal. So Essentially, we're going to be trading Edwards Park property, which we already gave away, which they're developing already. It's right around 2 acres. An acre behind us and $100,000 for 38 acres in a baseball field.
Mr. Chairman, I make that motion that we approve that deal.
Absolutely.
I do have a question. Now, you said the tennis courts would need to be available all the time?
No.
Outside?
No, not all the time.
No.
So it's during daylight hours. There were initial talks when we were talking about this about 3 years ago about lighting the courts and letting people use them. We were like, during daytime hours, but only when our students are not using them.
Okay, so I was gonna say, what if there's a tennis?
No. Our students have first rights
And the baseball field would be ours only?
Yeah, the baseball field already is ours only.
Okay.
We've already consummated that deal, as he
So
said.
we would have something around that to prevent people from...
We have fences around baseball fields, and we have locks on the gates to go into the dugouts. But if we built anything in the future, the plan was, 3 years ago, in my personal opinion, you have to build a softball field there for the girls. Does a couple of things. They're playing right now down on Jackson Park, Field 5. I don't know if you've ever been to Jackson Park during the day, between 5 o'clock and about 9 o'clock. It's a madhouse, right? And they need as many of those fields as possible for the youth sports that they're having down there, especially girls softball, which is really taking off in Henderson County right now. They just got started a couple of years ago. Hendersonville High School has never had their own softball field. Each one of our other schools has their own softball field. All of our other schools have their own baseball field on their campuses. But this would put Hendersonville on par with the rest of the schools with having the baseball field, potentially building out, or we need to build out the softball field, and then the girls' tennis team. I mean, they've won like the last 6 state championships, 4 state championships in a row. It'd be nice for them to have tennis courts like our other schools do as well. My ultimate vision there from a long time ago, and still now true to this day, is leaving some space in the middle of that 22-acre property to potentially build a county-owned, maybe school combination swimming facility. I'm a big believer that swimming is not just it's something that everybody needs to know. And we help our second graders learn how to swim, but we kind of stop right now. And that was started by Amy and Ms. McCall, and it's a phenomenal program, but we need to continue that program, especially with minorities. A lot of minorities don't have the opportunity to be able to swim. We could do this in conjunction with them. Now we're getting ahead of ourselves on that. Let's get the property.
It's a no-brainer.
But once we get this property, then we can start talking about grandiose plans and then bring it back down to earth. So we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second, real quick?
I second.
All right, and more discussion?
If I may, for anyone listening, a reminder too, that the lot behind you will not be developed. It will not be turned into a parking lot. There are restrictions on that everybody has agreed to as well. So that will remain green space with a similar usage as to any future tennis courts that you might have at Berkeley as well through the city. So we have worked that out as well.
Well, vice versa. If the school system decides to sell the Berkeley property, they have to give it to the city first.
Give them
Offer it to the city first. And if they decided that they wanted to develop that property into some apartments, well, they would have to offer us that property first before they can make that decision. So I think that the deal that we struck with them, the help of our counselors, I think is really solid. It protects the school system for the future, and I think it sets us up to do some great things.
And Mr. Campbell, you're in agreement with what our chair said?
The agreement contains rights of first refusal on everything that's being
sides.
conveyed, both sides.
Not that I don't believe Blair, I just want to make sure.
Well, and it's on the
In the document.
It's also on the other piece of property that they're developing right now.
Right, okay.
So if they decided to sell their putt, they would have to offer it to us first.
Good job. I know you, Mr. Craven's been working on this for quite a long time, so this is a good job, sir.
I'm ready for some motions to be made. We got a motion, we got a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We're done. All right, so we'll authorize Mr. Henning to start getting that stuff knocked out. And
You'll make contact with the city attorney tomorrow.
awesome. Thank you. Next up. All right, this is a fun one. We're going to be discussing Bill 219, the charter school omnibus, and discussing whether we're going to send a resolution up to our legislators or not. Who would like to start this ball of fun out?
If I may, I will share that what you have in your packet came from the North Carolina School Board Association. They provided this supposed HB 219 charter bill, and they also provided through the work with Mr. Campbell's office as well, a draft resolution should you want to adopt it. So I'll quit right there.
Okay.
So it's my understanding that as the way things are done right now, the local proportionate share per ADM follows the student to the charter school, correct?
Yes, that would include county commissioner appropriations, fines, and forfeitures.
And that's the way it is right now?
Correct.
Okay.
And what this bill essentially does is take pots of money where they potentially don't have, programming or, and we would have to share those funds with them on an unfair basis where they would not have to share those coming back to us on any funding or grants or any type of funds that we have maybe have saved through fiscal responsibility. There's a lot to chew in this bill, but I think it's the right thing to do to adopt a resolution, really stating that in its current state that we are not in favor of HB 219.
I sent an email out this weekend to our county commissioners and our legislative representatives and a few other people, and I want to just let everybody else know that I think that charter schools do have a place in our education. Of one of my son's good friends was having a difficult time at our public schools, and he withdrew and went to a charter school, which was smaller, had more teacher, smaller classrooms, more interaction, and he thrived there. And now he's going to a college, and it really turned him around. So I don't want this to become a let's beat up on charter schools kind of topic, which I know we won't because we're not that kind of people. But I also believe that, some of the funding that comes to public schools, I have a list of, and I know this is a list that changes and gets added to, but I have 17 items here that are different between LEAs and charter schools. For instance, K-3 class size, we have maximums. Charter schools have complete flexibility. Teachers' assistant allotments. LEAs, no transfers to other positions. Charter schools, no restrictions. Classroom teacher allotment, no transfers in or out. Charter schools, no restrictions. School technology, no transfers in or out. Charter schools, no restrictions. Textbooks, digital resources, no transfers in or out for LEAs. Charter schools, no restrictions. Retirement benefits, LEAs must offer. Charter schools, not required. State health plan, we are required to participate. Charter schools, not required. There is a difference between the two. And I'm okay with there being differences. It's okay. But the problem is when you cannibalize one to fund the other, if they're not equal, it just doesn't make sense. And I would go along with Mr. Craven's recommendation that we send up, what would you call again?
Resolution.
Yeah, the resolution. We set forth the resolution, and just to let people know that there are differences between the two. But again, I am not to say charter schools should not be here. But they do have a place, and they are good, but they are not equal. And we shouldn't, when our money leaves from here and goes to there, it kind of assumes that they are equal, and they're not. We provide more and are required to do more with our money than they are.
So I didn't want to assume you wanted to adopt a resolution, but right here is a draft of the final resolution, should you want to use it as the format.
And that was the resolution that we sent in the weekly update the past 2 weeks.
2 weeks ago, yes, and Mr. Campbell will be very familiar with this.
This came from his office.
And I believe also, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I believe Transylvania also set forth this same resolution.
Yes.
I'm not sure there's a school board, a public school board, that's not in support of this resolution. Probably a better way to say it.
So moved.
All right. There's motion. Is there a second there?
And,
Second?
yes.
All right. Any other discussion on HB 219, the resolution, differences between charter schools and we could be here all day differences between charter schools and public schools, but yes, ma'am.
Yeah, well, let me just say that there is a taxation, a double taxation here that we need to be aware of.
Without a doubt.
That we really need to let everybody know how the money is, and if you would go into a little detail.
Sure, I can give some examples for the benefit of the public. For example, right now, when you do not spend all of the resources available to you in a given year, you put that into fund balance, which is your savings account. That, under current law, is not shared with charter schools because it comes from pots of money, including money that's already been shared with charter schools. For example, if you didn't use every penny of your county commission allotment, put some of that into fund balance, when you use it in a subsequent year, you would have to share it again. So that would be an example of double dipping. If you allow folks to use your facilities, you ask folks to pay you a small fee to cover the light bill, to cover actual costs for use of facilities. You would then have to share that with a charter school, even though that no one's using the charter school facilities. Federal reimbursements, Medicaid services. For example, if you provide services to a special needs child, you can apply to Medicaid to have that reimbursed. You would have to use unrestricted money and share it with the charter school when you got that federal reimbursement, even though, again, that wasn't a service to a charter school student. Gifts and grants, if a member of the community wanted to give money for a reading recovery position to the Henderson County Schools, a share of that money would have to be shared. And then sales tax refunds. You only get a portion of the local sales tax that you pay back. Charter schools get all of the sales tax they get back, but they would still share in your sales tax reimbursement. And then I think also, Ms. Dale, it's important to note that all of these categories that I've mentioned, this is a one-way door. The charter schools do not have to share any money with you whatsoever. This is only a bill for you to take these pots of money and share a proportionate share with the charter school. It doesn't run both ways. So if a charter school got a $2 million grant, they wouldn't be sharing any of that. If you got a $2 million grant, you would be sharing 7% of that.
That's lottery money.
That's capital. That's separate. Good question.
So I am all about the money following the child.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. But when you mentioned something about Medicare coming to a student in Henderson County Public School, and then that money being allocated over to charter school, you've actually taken away from that one student. If you, I mean, that's just.
Right. Or you've taken other unrestricted dollars, and now you can't use those because you have to
Yes.
transfer.
And it could go to
So it
another
creates-
county as well.
I'm sorry?
It could follow that kid to Buncombe County or Rutherford County or anywhere.
So it creates a huge deficit, needless to say, and we do know that some of the schools, some of the charter schools do not have pre-K. We do know that some do have after-school, but not all do, and so they take a portion of that money as well. And so that creates another shortfall in the public school.
Right. Any after-school care tuition you receive, you'd have to share. If they choose to have an after-school program, they would not share their tuition. That's exactly right.
All right. Yes, sir.
One more item.
And this has been the law since 2010. I meant to mention that. This law has been in play, these separate funds have been in place by statute since 2010.
And I also would want everybody to realize, and I hope I can be generic, but give them an idea of how much money we are talking about.
I would just say that it would depend on, this is also likely to generate more litigation. And your representatives need to know that as well, because no matter how well you draft things, there's always attorney interpretations. But I think based on current year numbers, it would probably be more than six figures.
Okay, so in other words, six figures, could be, six figures. That's maybe over $100,000. The county commissioners would need to know that we would have to turn around and ask them for whatever leaves us, correct?
I'd leave that up to the board, and if you ask the county commissioners for it, you need to add another 6%, because 6% of what you get is going to go to charter schools.
Okay, so we would have to ask for 106% of what is taken from us. That's
However
what-
mathematically that works out, correct.
Okay, so, and that may, okay, well, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that that was known by the county commissioners and the public who may be listening.
I think it's been articulated very well as to what this would do to our schools. And we long to obviously be excellent stewards of our money and take care of, these kids. And so I think it's been articulated very well as to why this would not be good for us.
All right, we have a first and a second on the floor. No further discussion. We'll go ahead and vote on it. All those in favor of this resolution, sending it up to our legislators, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's approved. Thank you.
Let me ask one more question. Would this be sent to the commissioners?
Send it to whoever you want to.
Could we send it to the commissioners as well?
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Send it to the commissioners.
Yeah, we'll send it whoever you want us to make sure receives a copy. We'll be glad to get it there.
All right, next up is going to be approval of the audit contract for 22-23. Mr. Bernie Socia, and you're coming to the podium. I like it.
All right, so normally I don't come to you for a contract of this size, but we do have a board policy that says I should. That is 8310, and that says that the contract for an audit needs to come to the board. So I have brought to you a contract for Carlin and Anderson to audit our financials for the 22-23 fiscal year. The dollar amount on there, as you see, is $31,500. I certainly support them coming and doing it. They have been here for several years. They meet all of the criteria of understanding governmental accounting, understanding school accounting. They are local in town, and their cost is certainly not something that we can turn away from.
I would agree wholeheartedly. Nobody's ever really excited about an audit.
Did we have other financial auditors step up and bid on the contract?
There are other auditing firms out there that we could, if we were going to go out to a
Oh, okay.
that would.
This is under the threshold where you have to put a bid out. Correct? Mr. Cameron?
Pardon?
This is under the threshold for where we would have to put a bid out.
Yeah, well, actually, it's a service contract, so it doesn't have to be bid at all. This is board policy.
It's just board policy.
Yeah.
90,000. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that we accept this offer.
Absolutely. They are
Carlin Associates.
top notch. So, motion's made by, there's a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right. I want to skip C really quick, and I'm going to move to D, to cafeteria manager bonus. You've been sitting here very patiently, and I so appreciate it. I want to get into a big discussion on this. So, yeah, don't sit down yet. Please come up. This is off the cuff. I just wanted to get you there.
Based on the pictures.
Right?
So, you've heard all sorts of things about the salary increases that have happened over the last couple of years. And with the minimum being raised to $13 2 years ago and then $15 this year, one of the, I guess we'd say, unintended consequences of doing such a thing is it has taken our child nutrition program and sort of scrunched the child nutrition assistants and the managers' pay into a much closer area. So as we point out, there used to be a difference in there where it was 14 to 20% between the two positions. And now that they got sort of squished together with the new salary schedules, with the change in pay, they're looking at less than 10% of a difference between those two jobs, which is posing a little bit of a staffing concern because there's not as much of an incentive anymore for someone to want to become a manager for all the additional responsibilities that are had. So what Mr. Rolfe has done in support of his managers has come, and what he's requesting out of child nutrition funds, they have a large fund balance, is to use those dollars to provide $2,500 bonus for the managers, which would in essence sort of recreate that gap in pay that is no longer there. So that is the request that's put forth. If you have any questions for myself or Mr. Rolfe, we are here to talk about them.
So a question I would have is, you're asking for a flat rate bonus, $2,500 per cap. So regardless of whether I'm a cafeteria manager of North Henderson High School or Eddyville Elementary, I get the $2,500. Is that?
That is what we come up with.
Is that what we're?
Just a single.
Okay, that's a little troubling to me.
Well, there currently exists a spread for instance, Apple Valley North and elementary schools, and that's something we've discussed too, probably needs to be readdressed because what had been established years ago is no longer equitable. That $2,500 basically represents the dollar amount difference averaged between all the managers that exist right now. And without getting into a very complicated spreadsheet, that $2,500 I think is a very fair equity to help with the discrepancy that exists.
And they are on, there is a different salary schedule for different size schools as well.
There is a differential, okay. And I guess the question would be, would we pay this all in a lump sum, or is it monthly?
We would do a one-time payment.
Okay.
So 23 managers? 21 managers. And so when would we pay this? When would you like for this to be paid?
We would do May or June.
And so what does this do for 23, 24?
Nothing. This is what we're talking about here is a one-time thing.
You know, I would much rather look at fixing the discrepancy that you say we're having going forward than spending, you said 21, so $52,500 on a one-time. Then all of a sudden, we're going to turn around in August with a brand-new school year, and it's the same, we have the same problem, correct?
Right, and I think the discussion we've had is, yes, then we need to immediately look at fixing those discrepancies that exist. And part of this was the state has recreated the pay scales. And with the recreation of the pay scales, there's quite a distance there to work with now to recreate the child nutrition pay scales within the state pay scales and have equitable pay rates, pay scales.
So do you feel that this will be adjusted by that going forward, that the pay scale?
That'd probably have to be a local decision because the state pay scales are just, they're much fewer of them now that address our staff, but it's a much broader scale.
So we look at this as a two-step process. This is the first request in the two-step process, is to take care of this year based on what we know we have in the reserves to handle for this one-time bonus. Next step of the process, we'll be looking at his revenues for the year, because you've got a normal operating year this year for the first time in several years. Take those scales, also figure out what the recommendations are from the General Assembly on the raises it'll be in, so that we don't address it now and then have to turn right around. So if we can handle this fiscal year with this bonus, which gives you a little bit of spread, for those discrepancies, then come back to the board with a more comprehensive recommendation to show you those salary scales.
All right. So it's coming out of your fund balance. How much is in the fund balance?
Over $2.5 million.
This year, how much money are we going to lose on child nutrition?
Right now, I haven't looked at where we ended up after this last, we were just over $100,000 in the red end of the last month. We still haven't gotten in our reimbursements yet from last month to know what March ended.
Do you have any projections for fiscal year 22, 23?
We are going to be less than 200,000 in the red by the end of the year.
So how do we, and I'm getting to a point, right? So we lost 200 grand this year. We're going to spend another 52.5 on bonuses. Next year, we're going to increase salaries. So are we going to run even deeper in the red because of that?
So that's one of the reasons we don't want to go too far ahead with the salary conversation right now, waiting to see what the General Assembly does, waiting to know what we're going to do with meal prices next year so that we aren't doing what you're asking about. We don't want to do that. So we're going to have to tread lightly in that area based on how we can do operations so that we're not going into the red.
And you know my conversations with this from the past, right? And I've had the conversation with Mr. Rhodes for years on childcare. And this program, I view the very same way. I don't want to make money on the lunches, but I certainly don't want to lose money.
And I certainly do not want to raise meal prices again.
Well, I mean, you're going to have to.
You're going to have to.
You're going to absolutely, without a doubt, 100%.
If you don't do anything,
you're
lose
coming,
money.
right, you're coming to us next year with a pretty significant increase, I would imagine, right? And so at some point, you got to figure it out.
No, let me add that part of the loss this year is planned loss. You know, child nutrition program is supposed to hold a maximum of 3 months operating balance. We had 4.1, I believe, at the end of the year, which equated to about $700 and some thousand that we're supposed to spend. Now, we're looking at, I'm projecting about 150, could be in that 200, but my projection is about 150 loss for the year out of that $700 plus $1,000 that I need to spend.
I don't understand. I don't follow you there.
If the Child Nutrition Department has over 3 months operating balance,
Okay.
we have to present a spend down plan to the state.
Okay.
So in essence, I have 700 and whatever the monthly operating
the 3
balance,
months.
700 and some $1,000 to spend this year, which comes out, if I make any money, that adds to that.
But the problem with that thinking, though, is that that money was accrued during COVID when you were getting full reimbursements on all the lunches, and we were sending lunches out by the busloads, right? And so you were getting paid for those with those federal dollars, and so we got rained down on federal dollars. That's why your fund balance ballooned at that time.
Yeah.
That is not going to be the case in the next couple of years going forward, and I am terrified, and like Jay said, whether I'm here or not, or get elected or not, or chair or not, at some point in time, at the way that this program is going, it's going to become insolvent.
And I think honestly, that would be many, many years in the future.
But it's our job to look at
I've
that.
demonstrated strong fiscal responsibility in this program in the time I've been director. I've grown this program year after year, so I think I've demonstrated the ability to manage that program.
I agree absolutely, completely with your assessment there that you have done a phenomenal job with this program, but everybody has a finite expiration on when they're going to be here for this program. And I want to make sure that it's one of those things that we have enough, that I don't want to, as a school board member, have to worry about coming up every year and saying, okay, it's 50 cents or 75 cents more, because we will get more emails and more phone calls about those prices of those lunches than anything else that we do. Anything. And it's one of those programs that we don't have to actually offer. We could hire an entity from the outside to come in to handle that, just like childcare, because it's an enterprise program, right? It's an extra program on top of what we offer. So I am okay with you spending the money to give a bonus this year. There has got to be a long-term fiscal plan for child nutrition to make it so that we are not losing money. Period.
And we will work with Mr. Rolfe to make sure that is the case.
I've got one more thing. Now, tell me when I've said something incorrect, because it'll be real quick. But you said the salaries shrank and they became closer, correct?
Okay, you're off there a little bit.
But you said
The gap between the two positions is changed. The salaries didn't come down.
right, but the gap
between the
decreased.
two decreased.
But there is still a gap.
There's a little gap left.
Okay. And Mr. Rolfe, you said, correct me again, but you said $2,500 is what you thought was a fair difference between the two.
Right, and
Correct?
that was based on an average of about $1.50 and same year related positions between an assistant and a manager that is gone now.
Okay, so what
I have a manager makes $1 more than her assistants.
So what went through my mind was there is, the gap shrunk, but there is still a gap. And 2,500 is what you thought would be fair for a manager to be compensated over. Is all that correct?
Yes.
So maybe it doesn't have to be a whole $2,500. Maybe the gap shrunk, so maybe someone's getting 1,000 more, but it needs to be 20. Maybe that could be reduced to 1,500 or 2,000. Because if they were the same, I can see as, the manager does deserve more. But we've already agreed that the gap shrunk, but there is still a gap. What is that gap? What does a manager get more than? Because if there is already a gap, maybe you don't need 2,500. If you feel that 2,500 is a fair difference.
This is based on basically the average, and it of course changes with years of service, but the average that a manager made over an assistant previously was $3 an hour. And the average now is about $1.50, a little less. So that $2,500 is based on basically that additional $1.50 times 215 days times 8 hours.
Roughly what does that come into as a yearly salary? Not hourly, but your managers versus your assistant managers, what is their approximate yearly salary?
Well, there's a big spread again based on years of service.
Yeah, the biggest problem with that one is going to be that most of the assistants aren't full 8-hour employees, so the annual, that's why we got it to the hourly breakdown that he was using.
I'm going to make a motion. I move that the Henderson County Board of Public Education approve a one-time bonus of $2,500 to each child nutrition manager in fiscal year 2022-23, and this is what I ask of you two. We have to get this thing under control. We have to get costs in line. I do not want to make $1 on this program, but I don't want to lose $155,000, $200,000, $250,000. We've got to stop that bleeding somehow, some way.
And I don't want our families to have to bear the brunt of salary increases. We've got to find ways. Scott found ways in in child care that we didn't have to raise prices. Am I correct, or did we have to raise? We didn't have to raise prices.
We did, but it really was on.
We did some procedural things.
We absolutely did. Yes, and that was the big thing.
That was the big thing right there.
I was gonna say,
So I made a motion. Is there a second, first of all?
Second.
All right,
I'm just,
more discussion.
yeah, I'm with you on this, but, my thought process is that we tend to, hopefully, most of the time, over budget for a lot of other things. And if there is going to be one program that we lose money on, I don't want to lose money on any program, but if there's going to be one program that we're going to lose money on, if it's feeding the kids, I could live with that.
I want the kids to be fed.
I want the kids to be fed.
That conversation's for another day.
Okay.
You got a motion in a second.
Yep. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right, yeah, go ahead.
How many tickets?
Stay with us, Robert.
The national manager of the year.
This is the first time that Mr. Rolfe has been before this board in my tenure as superintendent as the reigning National School Nutrition Director of the Year.
And listen,
A month and a half left.
and I know that might have been tough, but I need you to hear it from me that just like when we were talking to Mr. Rhodes about childcare, we were losing money left and right. And I know that child nutrition has seen some crazy different spikes over the last couple of years. We went to just throwing food on buses and taking it out to people and feeding anybody, to I wholeheartedly believe in the second chance breakfast. I wholeheartedly believe in feeding every single kid. I think we should give every single kid lunch as well. It was phenomenal seeing everybody in there eat. Don't have to worry about free or reduced or any of that other stuff. You just grab your food and you go. But we're not there. Federal government's not there to give us that money, so we've got to be more fiscally responsible to make sure that what we have, we keep, and we don't spend to where we are spending extra tax dollars to subsidize child nutrition. So,
Chairman, if I could just say one thing, because I do help oversee this.
yep,
We're working on a plan.
I know.
Because I promise you, the superintendent is not going to allow us to put ourselves in a situation where we do any of the things that have been discussed. Because what we are having to look at is we're going to have to look at the end of the year and just see where we're at.
Yeah, sure.
But we also have got to get kids who qualify for free and reduced. We got to get every kid who can qualify, as many as possible, to get them to sign up as well. We've also got to see what it's going to look like where our current charges are at, just like we did with childcare. It all boils back down to, we don't want to charge families any more than we have to.
No.
But at the same time, we also have to live responsibly, to your point. But the only reason I interject is to say, we've all three been working with the superintendent. We're working on a plan, and it will be good, I promise
Do
you.
you have, is it just by paper right now that they have to fill out the free and reduced?
Online also.
They can do it online as well. Do we have it on our app? Grant,
That I don't know.
let's work on that. That'd be awesome.
May I ask a question? Because I have heard from a couple of principals that thing is just really, it's hard to navigate. I know someone told me, I don't remember which principal told me, that they were having parents come in and they were actually filling that out at school.
Yeah.
That is a Henderson County printout, correct? We do that. We print that, but it's based on federal guidelines, correct?
We put that on our paper.
It has to be approved federally, and we pay for the paper printed.
Okay.
Basically, the online is a service of our software provider, so that doesn't cost us anything. So we've always been, and we only started that really going gangbuster about a year before the pandemic. We finally saw almost 50% of the applications online. A lot of districts have gone to the point they don't do paper applications anymore unless requested. We've kind of held off on that, and then pandemic, boom, throws a problem in there where we've had to go back and really struggle to get families to get applications turned in, either paper or online, and everybody's seen the news about school meal charges. And thankfully, we're kind of in the same position, or very close to what we've always been, which isn't serious. And we do get lots of community donations that help for outstanding charges. So by the end of the year, typically, that's not an issue for Henderson County, but just getting those applications in.
And we have to
It's
do
the
this.
issue, and to Mr. Craven, yes, we'd love universal free lunches
Yeah,
nationwide,
same.
but
Same.
I just came back from the nation's capital, and there's no movement in that direction. States are taking it on now, I think 5 states now are in that direction.
Mr. Rolfe, do we have any leeway into modifying or designing our own free and reduced application, or is that pretty well dictated by the federal government?
It's.
Or can we modify it at all to make it simpler?
Ours is modified.
Oh,
So yes, you do have leeway.
Okay.
And it has to be approved. There's certain things that have to be on there.
Right.
The actual, look of it or whatever can change. Paper application, I think, and they can always get help. They can, we do get lots of calls, people call.
It's
Managers
intimidating.
help. We were seeing that online application, especially for the Spanish version, was very difficult for those families. They have made improvements in that, especially in the last year. They do respond to feedback and make changes. So I think that's getting better and better, but we do still see some issues with Hispanic families.
On that application, is there a way to say, to reaffirm, like, yes, this year is just like last year? Click a button, fills it out.
It has to be every year.
Is there a way they can retrieve their last year's
Yeah,
application
why can't we figure that out? Wouldn't that be easier?
and just
Grant?
modify things that have changed?
That's probably part of the federal requirement, is that it is filled out annually.
But if there's like a checkbox up the top that said, is your information the same as it was last year? Like your address and their date of births, and all it does is put your kids up 1 year. You push a little checkbox and it fills back out. So like if you do your tax return, if you do them online, right? And it says, did you still work at this place and at this place? Then, check this box and it just
Autofills.
throws it all in there. Autofills everything.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
I mean, think outside of the box and try to find ways to make it easy, find an easy button for people to fill that thing out.
It's just very intimidating looking, and not many people nowadays are going to sit down and put that amount of time into something.
All right, we take enough of your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, education lottery application.
All right, I'm back with another lottery application. It's in there, submitted this one, we have $234,135.09 available at the state level. Application has been signed over by the commissioners, ready for us to sign, to turn in. Again, this is for Hillendale and Mills River Elementary School debt service. Nothing new to this one.
Okay, keep this moving along. I move that the Henderson County Board of Public Education approve the Public School Building Capital Fund North Carolina Education Lottery application.
Second.
Who won? Tawana, you decide. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Good. I want to make a deal with you guys. Since it's 7:16, we got a couple more things to go through. Can we put the legislative budget items on Wednesday for our work session?
Sounds like a good
I'm in agreement.
We start at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're talking about budget anyways. Can we just slap it on there?
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome, done. Next up, capital update, Mr. Carl Taylor. Because we could be here for an hour, 2 hours talking about that. Literally. Not about the capital update.
Some of the things you'll hear Wednesday.
Are going to tie right into it. Yes, perfect. Don't you get funny on us now.
Starting with our capital update with one of our Henderson County public projects that's been going on. That is the baseball and softball lights at North Henderson. Last month, we found out that we had to do an easement with Duke Energy for them to access our property to run the lines. So that easement was signed by us, but also had to be signed by the commissioners. So that went to the board meeting with the commissioners last Monday. So that document has been turned into Duke Energy. We're now back to waiting on them to get out there and do their work. The update that we received from them last week was that they have us on the list now that they have the easement, and it's 4 to 6 weeks.
Can I stop right there real quick and just add a piece? So North Henderson and Apple Valley are paid off, correct? On Apple Valley, and so that's why the county owns the deed on that piece of property?
Talking about the building.
All right, so this is my point I want to make. In a lot of our, when we build a school, typically we have to give that land or that school, if we're remodeling or whatever, to the county commissioners so that they can then go borrow money from the LGC. They can build whatever needs to happen. They pay it off over 15, 20, 30 years. And then normally in the paperwork, it'll say you have a year to reclaim this property after it's been paid off. And it seems like that hasn't happened.
At least once.
We found a lot more than that.
Multiple times.
Oh, no.
And so what I would like to kind of direct everybody's attention here is the reason that this is delayed is that we had to go through another level, and they're going to approve it, but we have to go through another level of bureaucracy to get Duke Power to actually turn the lights onto our baseball field because we don't actually own Apple Valley. We don't own the deed. So I've directed the superintendent to kind of go through all of our properties.
I thought we said that.
Yeah, well, it's a process, man, and looking at the right of ways and looking at.
I thought we said that about the fire station out.
Well, that was the first. Well, actually, yeah.
That kind of led us, and then this most recent one led me then to look into every single deed.
thought we had already instructed.
Mr. Taylor had done that with me, and now we're working with the county manager to then take the next steps that we would need to take.
So what we need to do as a board is we need to, if those properties are our properties and they're paid off, they need to be in our names. Because if we need to make changes or do something, we don't need an extra level or another month out potentially, or multiple months for us to approve, for them to approve, for finally to something to get done. So I just wanted to bring this to everybody's attention. This is not anything that's happened from this administration, but prior administrations, there have been, the ball's been dropped. So we are going to reclaim that ball going forward.
So is that a process that's in process right now?
Process that's in process. But for this, we had to get their approval, so, because we had to have that power run out there. So we had to get their approval to go across their right of way, to go onto our property to be able to put the lights on, turn the power on.
This is an example.
This is a huge example. We could have had this done a month ago. So anyways, thank you.
So we also have a note on all of the properties currently that when they do pay off, to make sure that we make that contact as well. So for example, I guess Mills River and Hillendale will be the next one.
Yeah.
So we will take care of that in due time.
You do it the day after the note's paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't wait 12 months.
But no, that's just the lottery pay. They, I think,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry.
You're good.
It's a rabbit hole I just went down. It's important though.
I was thinking about that earlier, but I was just like, we've crossed that
Well,
bridge.
there are quite a few that we need to look at.
I didn't know that. New board member, I needed to know that.
I didn't know that until a month, 2 months ago.
Not even 2 months.
Not even 2 months. I assumed that previous folks would have looked at the agreement, and I read through the agreement. It said, if you don't claim this within 1 year, it reverts back to the county.
That happened to the Johnson property.
It did.
Yeah, that was, they had, Girl Scouts had it. Y'all remember this? It goes way back. Girl Scouts had it, Boy Scouts had it. Only one stipulation. For 7 years, during a 7-year period, they had to have one tent on it. One tent. In 7 years. And they didn't. So it can happen.
All right, so we'll get on that.
Right. Also, just wanted to give you all an update on our agreement with NC State and their assessment of our enrollment development within Henderson County. So I continue to work directly with them as we navigate through this process. So now that we finished up March, I checked in at the end of the month, and so they've completed that first line where they've collected data, student data as well. And so I have a meeting with them tomorrow to continue working through the April line items so that we are in line for a June presentation by them to the board about the current development, what they see that doing in terms of our enrollment trends over the coming years.
And Mr. Taylor, how up to date are you able to keep them? I mean, we know at the last commissioners meeting that huge project was approved.
That very next day, I sent them a link to an article.
I'm not surprised.
well, you know,
Surprised at 390 more.
yeah, so,
270, sorry.
they got a link to an article that had that information in it, and their response was, oh, thank you, continue sending these to us.
Ms. Caskey, I think I texted him from the meeting when I was
Yes.
sitting there and heard it. I was like, oh, 2 more. And send him.
It's going to be like 1,100 units on that piece of property.
Yeah.
Right, now transitioning on to some MRTS projects. Again, this is the Mr. T's money that runs through the county commissioners. In terms of our security cameras, all of the cameras have now been installed in our middle and high schools. With that being, you know, just shy of 300 total cameras across all those campuses, there is some troubleshooting that unfortunately is having to be done, especially in some of our larger spaces such as gymnasiums where we have 360-degree cameras. Those sometimes don't talk as nicely with our network as we would hope. But fortunately, Haynes Technology has done a great job of continuing to go back to those sites as need be. And so they have one individual continuing to do that troubleshooting work there, as well as at some of the elementary schools. They've completed installation at Bruce Drysdale, Edneyville, Etowah, and Hendersonville Elementary at this time. And so again, if there's any issues that arise at those sites, they're continuing to address those. But at this time now, they've also continued on to the additional elementary schools. And so I believe they are at Fletcher Elementary. They started there at the end of last week. And then they'll just kind of keep working down the list as they knock one off until they are able to finish up those remaining schools.
And you said that's over 300 cameras?
Just at the middle and high schools was just shy of, I believe, 300 total cameras at those 7 campuses. And then for the elementary schools, I'll have to go back and total those back up. Yes, it's
great.
Fortunately, it covers pretty much all of our interior hallways and common areas, and then a lot of the exterior space as well.
Great.
An update with Upward and that renovation project. Last month, again, we had a CMR pre-proposal meeting. The proposals were due to the county mid-month. So now we are waiting on the county to go through that CMR selection process. And so that should happen at an upcoming commissioner meeting. They have one in the middle of the month. I'm not sure if that'll be on the agenda at this time or not. But if not, then it would be one of the ones that then would follow as we head into May. And then looking at West Henderson, we had a pre-construction meeting with the architects and Carolina Specialties last month. And so now those two are able to work together on coming up with pre-construction pricing based on those schematic designs. At that point in time, once they have the pricing for that part, we can look and see if we're within budget. And if not, then start those conversations about maybe what changes and adjustments need to be made. All right. So I'll take any questions that you may have at this time.
Thanks, sir. Any questions for him? Financial statements, Mr. Socia.
All right.
Yes, please.
Mr. Taylor, now, once you finish West Henderson, will you then have all of our campuses single point entry? Except for Upward, of course.
Yes, so Upward and West West kind of has that a little bit where you walk into that little hallway and you got to get buzzed into the office. So they kind of have that, whereas, you know, at Upward right now, you get buzzed in, you're in school. So Upward truly is the last one that needs that 2 points of, 2 touch points before you have access to the entire school.
That's not exactly true. East Henderson. I mean, you open a door on C building and you're in, right?
Correct. The separate buildings, yes, you could have access into those. Now, they're secured throughout the day. The ones that are on the true exterior of those buildings, those stay locked all day, except during class change, you know, you'll have students flow in and out.
East is just such a, I mean, it's the one that makes me the most nervous.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, real quick, the local current expense and other restricted funds, as of March 31. So we have received now $29,761,000 in revenues for the year and made expenditures of $23,207,000. And I pointed out, we just have one more month of county appropriations left and this year. So then we'll start decreasing that, what looks like a very lopsided amount of money that we have. That's because of the way we get our revenue. As far as the capital outlay fund, Mr. Taylor just gave you the rundown on the projects. So we've received $1,756,000 and we have spent already out $1,011,000. And we do have of the remaining funds, we already have $995,000 that are encumbered, projects underway, or just waiting for payments to be made. So that is where we are right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for him? All right, general operations. What?
So first, I know that the two presentations were very long this evening, but I hope you found them valuable. We really wanted to invest
They
that
were,
time to make sure that, that everybody knew what was going on and felt like those dovetailed well together. But it is my pleasure to be the last agenda item, and I will start on the general operations update for April. It is School Library Month, so we're certainly excited. We shot them a little email and told them how much we appreciate what they do each and every day with the literacy and all the other pieces that they add. We do have our budget work session scheduled for Wednesday. It will be at 9 in the boardroom. And we have another one scheduled for the following week if you need it, also scheduled at 9 on Wednesday in the boardroom. The NC Scholars Reception will be April the 20th, and that's at the Blue Ridge Community College in the TED Center, and that's 11:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. April the 25th, we have the 2023 Henderson County Education Foundation Education Celebration. That'll be at 5:30, starting going until about 8 at Jeter Mountain Farm. It is School Principals Day and Substitute Appreciation Day. How well we need to celebrate that one on May the 1st. School Lunch Hero Day is May the 5th. Our Public Board of Education school tours will be on May the 3rd at 10. We will be visiting Upward, Fletcher, and Mills River. We'll keep it elementary this time. Teacher Appreciation Week is the week of May 8th through the 12th. May the 26th is Henderson County Early College Graduation, and that will be at 6 p.m. And then June the 9th is the big night, where you will see your other institutions hold their commencement exercises. Start with Henderson County Career Academy at 5:30, Hendersonville High School at 6, North Henderson High School at 6, East Henderson High School at 7, and West Henderson High School at 7:30. I know where I will be next year because I have a junior at West Henderson. Well, I know where I better be if she does what she needs to next year, but we will split those up as a leadership team to make sure there's representation. And I think that I will be at Hendersonville High School for Mr. Wilkins' final graduation as he will be moving on into retirement. So end of an era there for the Bearcats. But also, Tawana and I will make sure we keep you updated on the many things, because we're hitting that time now where you're going to have something all along as we get to the last month and a half of school.
Yeah, there's,
Question about the scholar luncheon, April 20th at Blue Ridge Tech. We need to make reservations for that if we plan to attend.
so typically on that one, we would get a little thing for us, invite, and then also the CTE. Dr. Marlowe, remind me, the CTE scholars. Are we doing a dinner for them this year, or? Okay, and then we usually have top scholars as well. Those two are my favorite. So let's make sure we go all out and do the whole thing. It's, top scholars is usually when we hand out the medals and do the whole thing, and that's a fun one.
So we will keep an active list that we push out to you multiple times, and on my weekly updates, you can start looking for Miss Point. I'll also make sure that we're adding those.
And send us some paperless posts or whatever those things are, if you guys need to. Yep. Anything else?
No, sir. Thank you for
All right.
the opportunity to share.
Absolutely. I will take a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.